Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Rowan Ford. Rowan Ford was born on April 11, 1998, in San Diego, California. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her mother, Colleen, moved with her to a small town called Stella in Missouri. Later, her mom met a man named David, and they got married. Colleen had several children from a previous marriage, and soon after their wedding, she and David had a daughter together. Altogether, Rowan had 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and they shared a very close bond. She spent a lot of time outdoors, riding her bike around town, enjoying swimming, and indulging in her passion for drawing. She also liked going to Sunday school at the local church, where she always volunteered to help other kids who had some issues with their tasks. In November 2007, when Rowan was 9 years old, she was in the 4th grade at the local elementary school. Her mom worked the night shift at a store, while her stepdad spent most of the day on the farm, which made Rowan often fend for herself, making her very independent. On November 2nd, she stayed home alone as usual. Her mom went to work, and her stepdad hadn't returned from the farm yet. The next morning, around 9 a.m., Colleen came home from her night shift and checked Rowan's room, but her daughter wasn't there. She asked her husband where her daughter was, and he said she had asked him if she could have a sleepover at a friend's house, and he had let her go. He didn't even ask the friend's name because their town was very small, and he wasn't worried about anything happening to her. But Colleen started to worry and decided to check with all of Rowan's friends. Since there were only a few streets in their town, it didn't take long, but none of them had seen her, and she hadn't stayed over at any of their houses, which made her mother even more concerned. Colleen searched the whole town but couldn't find her daughter. She went back home and told her husband that Rowan was nowhere to be found. She asked him to call the police and report her missing, but he reassured her that everything was fine and that she would come home soon. After waiting for several more hours with no sign of Rowan, Colleen took matters into her own hands and dialed 911 herself. The local sheriff immediately organized a search operation. He went to their house to speak with David, and as he was the last person to see Rowan before she disappeared, David said that on that evening, while he was working on the farm with his colleague Christopher, their mutual friend Nathan came by. They all decided to go to David's place to have some drinks and play pool. They stopped by the store, bought some alcohol, and went to David's house, where they spent several hours. Later in the night, Christopher asked Nathan to drive him home to the neighboring town, where his trailer was. They persuaded David to join them to continue the fun. Before leaving the house, he checked on Rowan in her room, seeing that she was asleep. David left with his friends, and they stopped by the store again to grab more alcohol and headed to Christopher's trailer, where they continued drinking for about an hour. After that, David decided to head home and asked Nathan to give him a ride. Nathan agreed but chose to take back roads instead of the main highway. By that time Nathan was quite drunk and didn't want to risk encountering the police. Nathan dropped David off and drove home. David went straight to bed. Soon after, he was awakened by Rowan, who asked if she could sleep over at a friend's house. Without much thought, he agreed and fell back asleep. Police approached this story with some skepticism. What puzzled them most was the fact that a 9-year-old girl decided to go to her friend's house in the middle of the night, and her stepfather let her go without even asking which friend she was talking about. The sheriff considered that David might be hiding something or directly involved in Rowan's disappearance, but he had no evidence to support this theory. Police searched the town and its surroundings until late at night. Local residents immediately joined the search, as they all knew Rowan's family and wanted to help. The population of Stella was only about 150 people, so news of her disappearance spread throughout the county. People were used to being able to let their children play outside without a worry, as nothing ever happened in such a quiet place. But now that Rowan vanished without a trace, and the police were unable to find her for a whole day. The residents of Stella were in a state of panic. The search for Rowan yielded no results on the first day. However, the investigation progressed on November 4th when the police spoke with Christopher in a neighboring town. He corroborated David's account, but revealed that David had not contacted him to inform him of Rowan's disappearance. Christopher stated he had not spoken with Rowan or her friends since that evening. Despite an expanded search with more volunteers, the police failed to find Rowan or any clues about her disappearance. The following day, the FBI joined the investigation while the local police continued searching the town and surrounding areas. As a result of growing skepticism towards David's account, detectives started focusing on a potential abduction. They spoke with all of Rowan's friends and verified that none of them had seen her on the night she went missing. As investigators questioned David, his account raised even more suspicions. David's details were inconsistent and contradictory. He altered the timeline of his whereabouts that night on multiple occasions. Additionally, David speculates that it is possible that Rowan left without his permission, which makes his story even more suspicious. During their investigation, FBI agents found out that David had borrowed his mother's car on the night of Rowan's disappearance, a detail he initially left out when questioned by the police. This new information led the authorities to seize both his mother's car and his own pickup truck for forensic examination. But unfortunately, no evidence was discovered. As part of the investigation, detectives wanted to speak with Christopher and Nathan again, since both had been with David that evening. Christopher was invited to the police station for further questioning, where he recounted the same story as before. He also agreed to take a polygraph test, which showed no signs of dishonesty. After leaving the police station and returning to work, Christopher noticed Sheriff Clark's car and signaled for him to stop. As the sheriff of Whitton, where Christopher lived, Clark had known him since childhood. Sheriff Clark was close friends with Christopher's foster parents and was someone Christopher had always looked up to and sought advice from in times of need. Sheriff Clark met with Christopher to discuss Rowan's disappearance. Although familiar with the case, Clark hadn't been directly involved since the investigation was led by the Stella Department. During their conversation, Clark noticed that Christopher was acting strangely, which led him to suspect that Christopher might be hiding something. Given the gravity of the situation and Rowan's uncertain fate, Clark shared his concerns with the FBI. His call prompted investigators to consider the possibility that Christopher might be withholding crucial information that could link Rowan's stepfather to her disappearance. They wondered if Christopher's actions were directed by Rowan's stepfather to lie, and whether Christopher feared being seen as an accomplice if he told the truth. Sheriff Clark told the FBI agents that he had a close relationship with Christopher and offered to help persuade him to cooperate. That evening, Christopher visited Colleen's house to ask about the search progress. FBI agents also arrived to speak with Colleen again and saw Christopher there. They asked him questions, and he repeated his previous account. However, Christopher then mentioned for the first time that he didn't rule out David's possible involvement in Rowan's disappearance. He expressed his willingness to help uncover the truth, even if it was terrible, and suggested wearing a wire to talk to David and try to get him to confess. The detectives decided against this approach. Instead, they asked Christopher to suggest locations where David might have hidden Rowan's body. Christopher provided several locations, which the police searched the next morning. Meanwhile, FBI agents questioned David again, but he continued to deny any involvement. Detectives searched Christopher's home for leads, but the search yielded no results. Meanwhile, Christopher visited the sheriff's office to discuss his encounter with the FBI with Clark. During their conversation, the sheriff sensed that Christopher was holding back information. After their meeting, Clark reached out to the detectives again, suggesting that Christopher might be withholding crucial information that helped prove David's involvement in the case. The FBI agents asked the sheriff to persuade Christopher to open up. as he had been in regular contact with Clark to discuss the case. It seemed that Christopher wanted to share important details but was hesitant to do so for unknown reasons. The following day, November 7th, the police asked Christopher to return to the station. They requested his permission to search a safe located in David's house, where Christopher had been living temporarily and still had some belongings. Christopher agreed to the search and also allowed the police to search his trailer and car. Additionally, Christopher voluntarily provided a DNA sample and agreed to answer the detective's questions again. During the questioning, he was asked to confirm David's story, but this time, Christopher revealed that his friend's account was not entirely accurate. The investigators then pressed him to disclose what really happened that evening. Christopher became agitated when the police treated him like a suspect in Rowan's disappearance. He refused to continue the conversation and left the station after warning the detectives that he might hire a lawyer. Later that evening, Christopher met with Sheriff Clark to express his concerns about the detective's behavior. Clark acknowledged Christopher's right to remain silent but explained that the police were doing everything possible to find Rowan. Christopher stated that he would no longer cooperate with the detectives and would only speak with Clark if he had any further information to share. Clark continued to encourage Christopher to open up, and eventually, Christopher broke down in tears, claiming that he loved Rowan and would never harm her. During his time living with the David family, Christopher formed a close bond with Rowan and the other children. They grew to treat him like one of their own, even affectionately referring to him as Uncle Christopher. Sheriff Clark realized that Christopher was on the verge of revealing crucial information, but just as he was about to open up, a visitor arrived at the police station, briefly distracting Clark and causing Christopher to leave. Sheriff Clark reached out to the FBI, updating them on his conversation with Christopher. Clark explained that Christopher was almost ready to disclose what he knew, but warned that pressuring him too hard could lead to him becoming defensive and seeking the help of a lawyer. Clark recommended giving Christopher time to reflect, and the detectives agreed. The search for Rowan continued the following day but yielded no results. However, a new clue came on November 9th, exactly 1 week after her disappearance. Search teams converged on a remote area near the town of Powell, about 10 miles from Stella, and made a significant discovery in the fields and woods, a large pit in the ground. When authorities searched the area, they found Rowan's body hidden under leaves and debris. She was not wearing any clothing from the waist down except for a pair of stockings. A medical examination revealed signs of strangulation and evidence of a sexual assault. After the discovery, FBI agents reached out to Sheriff Clark, asking him to speak with Christopher again, hoping Christopher would now be more forthcoming. Sheriff Clark learned that earlier that morning, Christopher had visited the station, looking for him, and told other officers that he needed to speak with Clark urgently. Sheriff Clark then began searching for Christopher, checking all his usual locations, but he was nowhere to be found. This continued until Christopher contacted Sheriff Clark himself, sounding distressed and asking if he was being followed. Christopher explained that after hearing about Rowan's body, he had driven around town to clear his head and noticed a gray car following him. Sheriff Clark assures Christopher that he knows nothing about the surveillance and suggests they meet in person. When they met, Christopher appeared nervous and expressed concerns for his safety. He feared that with Rowan's body found, he might be accused of murder and that someone might seek revenge against him. Clark took Christopher to the police station, and he said that now when the case had been classified as a homicide, it was time for Christopher to reveal everything he knew. However, when Clark asked Christopher to share what David had done to Rowan, Christopher became emotional and hesitant to talk at the station. He explained that there were too many people around and suggested they move to a quieter location. Clark agreed, and they drove to a small bridge a few miles outside of town. Once they arrived, Christopher asked Clark to handcuff him. Clark was surprised but tried to reassure Christopher that it wasn't necessary. Christopher insists that what he is about to say will change everything and that Clark will then have to arrest him. Christopher then began recounting the events of that night. He told Clark that he, Nathan, and David had gone to his trailer to continue drinking. Later, his friends decided it was time to head home. Nathan gave David a ride, and they chose to take back roads to avoid the police. Christopher had shocked Clark that he had intended to sexually assault Rowan. To carry out his plan, Christopher took advantage of the time when his friends were busy taking a detour through the field. He drove straight to David's house via the main highway. Under the cover of darkness, he slipped into Rowan's room, picked her up, and quietly transported her to his vehicle, carefully avoiding detection as she slept. When they reached his trailer, he sexually assaulted Rowan. This was interrupted when Rowan regained consciousness and tried her best to free herself, but to no avail. During the crime, Christopher took precautions to avoid recognition, deliberately choosing to keep the lights off and maintain his silence. He originally planned to return Rowan to her home under the guise of innocence, but under the illumination of a bright moon, Rowan finally laid eyes on Christopher as he transported her from the trailer. He grabbed a rope, resorted to force to resolve his predicament, and took Rowan's life with his bare hands. He frantically thought of ways to cover up his crime. He got in his car and began driving around the county, pondering methods of disposing of the body. He then remembered a large pit near a neighboring town and headed in that direction. When he arrived, he dumped Rowan's body in the hole and attempted to cover it with tree branches. Returning to the trailer, Christopher discovered traces of Rowan's blood on his clothes and mattress. He also realized he needed to dispose of her pants, underwear, and the rope used to kill her. He gathered these items and placed them in a large barrel, intending to burn them. However, he quickly reconsidered, realizing that a large fire would likely attract unwanted attention. Instead, Christopher dragged the barrel into a shed, closed the door, and started the fire inside. This revelation shocked Clark, who had previously suspected David of committing the crime and believed Christopher was withholding information. It was difficult for Clark to accept that a man he had known for nearly 20 years, a man with 3 young children of his own, was capable of such brutality. Although Christopher appears to be a good-natured man, his true nature is much more worrying. After finishing his story, Christopher willingly went to the police station with Clark. Once there, Christopher repeated his confession to the FBI agents and was subsequently arrested for murder. He also gave the authorities permission to search his trailer and car. As he concluded his confession, Christopher expressed regret over his actions and stated that he had cried uncontrollably the following day. The detectives then informed David about Christopher's confession. Given David's suspicious behavior and inconsistent statements, they suspected he might be covering for his friend. However, during interrogation, David revealed a shocking new testimony. David claimed that when he found Rowan missing from her room, he suspected Christopher might have taken her. He took his mother's car and drove to Christopher's trailer. He found Rowan lying on the bed. Christopher leaned towards her. Instead of rescuing Rowan, David joined in and also sexually assaulted her. He then helped Christopher kill her and dispose of her body. David reported that during that traumatic incident, his brain went into shock, and he had no memory of the night for several days. The detectives, surprised by this new information, re-questioned Christopher to verify David's claim. However, Christopher maintained that David was not involved and that incident unfolded as he had initially described. The inconsistencies puzzled the detectives, but Christopher's account still matched incident that had occurred. Medical examination revealed that the victim was strangled with a thin rope, a detail that only the killer would be aware of. A search of the trailer led to the discovery of a barrel containing ashes, and hair similar to Rowan's was found in Christopher's car. Although investigators were still uncertain about the truthfulness of each man's account, both David and Christopher made incriminating statements. As a result, David was also arrested, and the case were sent to court for further proceedings. During the trial, Christopher requested that his statements be excluded from the case, arguing that he was not aware they could be used against him and that the police had violated his rights. However, the judge rejected this request, as all of Christopher's conversations with investigators were voluntary. Christopher also attempted to present mitigating circumstances, citing his difficult childhood as a factor. He had been shuffled between biological and foster parents from a young age, which had a significant impact on him. Despite these efforts, Christopher was unable to avoid punishment. In 2012, 5 years after the murder, Christopher was sentenced to death. He appealed the sentence, but was unsuccessful. In contrast, David's situation was more complex. Although he admitted to assaulting and killing Rowan, his account conflicted with Christopher's statements, creating a significant problem. If the prosecution had charged David with murder, it could have potentially led to Christopher's conviction being overturned, allowing David to avoid accountability as well. However, due to the lack of concrete evidence, such as DNA, in fact, they were still uncertain about David's involvement. Although it was possible that David might have collaborated with Christopher in committing the crime, there was no supporting evidence for this theory. To minimize the risk of overturning Christopher's sentence, the prosecution made the difficult decision to reduce David's charges. As a result, David pleaded guilty to 2 lesser charges: child endangerment and obstruction of justice. David received an 11 years prison sentence, with a minimum of 5 years to be served. This outcome sparked widespread outrage, as many felt that if David was indeed involved in the murder, his punishment was disproportionately lenient. Unfortunately, this sentence is now final, and it is unlikely that David will face retrial for this case. Christopher remains in prison awaiting execution, but it's uncertain whether the death penalty will be carried out due to the often lengthy time between sentencing and execution, which can span decades, meaning he might spend the rest of his life in prison instead. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case, the case of Austin Harrouff. Austin Malcolm Harrouff, known by the nickname Golden Boy, was born on December 21, 1996, in Palm Beach, Florida. He was the eldest of 2 children, and was born into a wealthy and respected medical family. His father was a successful dentist with many private clinics, and his mother was a leading pharmaceutical expert. The Harrouff family lived in a spacious, luxurious house by the sea. When Austin was 1.5 years old, his younger sister Haley was born, and the 2 siblings quickly became close. Austin's parents ensured that he and his younger sister received a good education and encouraged personal growth and creative pursuits. Austin excelled at school and had many interests outside of studying. He was passionate about playing guitar, wrestling, football, and acting in an amateur theater group. He saw himself as a creative and ambitious person. Along with his parents and sister, Austin traveled extensively, discovering new places during their vacations. Austin described himself as a cheerful and optimistic person with a strong imagination who excelled in academics and sports through perseverance. However, Austin also admitted that he was very shy, which sometimes made it difficult for him to communicate with his peers. Austin's personal life was interrupted at the age of 13 when his parents decided to divorce. His father moved out of the family home and into a new home with his new partner, eventually marrying her. Meanwhile, Austin remained with his mother, who also found a new partner and married him within a year. Despite facing the emotional challenges of his parents' divorce, Austin continued to excel academically and athletically. Austin always dreamed of becoming a doctor, like his parents, to help others. He was a high-achieving student and was admired by many of his friends. Austin's physical transformation during his youth was remarkable. He grew to be 6 feet 2 inches tall, developed outstanding muscles, and became strong. Austin's charismatic smile and gentle demeanor gave him an almost angelic appearance. However, he still struggled with social anxiety and shyness, which limited his ability to form relationships. In his personal diary, Austin wrote candidly about feeling isolated at school. His classmates called him a nerd and made fun of him, leaving Austin with few friends. Despite these difficulties, he still held out hope that his life would improve once he entered college. Austin looked forward to starting over, forging new relationships, and gaining independence from his parents. The important turning point came when Austin received news that he had been accepted into the University of Florida's prestigious 4-year medical program. This achievement promised to open the door to a successful and rewarding medical career, with the opportunity to continue his studies at any of the top medical schools in the country. Overjoyed by this news, Austin felt like his dream was finally within reach. As he prepared to enter this new chapter, his parents drove him to the college campus in late August. With excitement mixed with trepidation, Austin began his journey to becoming an independent adult, documenting his experiences in his first vlog. During his freshman year, Austin became deeply interested in bodybuilding and spent a significant amount of time in the gym, achieving notable results. He had developed strong muscles, but his success was partly due to steroid use. Austin had openly discussed steroid use in a YouTube vlog he had started in the spring of 2016. Austin had posted various videos to his channel, including discussions about sports and fitness, musical performances with his guitar, and philosophical musings on life. However, over time, his posts became increasingly disturbing. Austin began warning his followers about the dangers of steroids, claiming that they could cause serious mental health consequences and drive a person crazy. Austin had 2 distinct physical states, a normal state and a state he called crazy. Austin found it difficult to understand these contrasting aspects of himself. Austin had created videos where he spoke in different voices, as if he were other people. Sometimes, Austin's voice changed and he burst into tears for no apparent reason. Experts then reviewed Austin's posts and concluded that Austin was desperately seeking help in each post. As Austin struggled to connect with others during his studies, his blog had become his primary means of expressing himself. Over time, videos recorded him gradually becoming insane. His behavior became increasingly erratic, provocative, and aggressive. Some subscribers suspected he was using banned substances while recording, and they asked him about it in the comment section. Austin denied this, saying it was unhealthy and that he would never use banned substances. However, his behavior showed otherwise. One subscriber even speculated that Austin might have dissociative identity disorder. The sudden changes in Austin were not only manifested in behavior but also in appearance. When he returned home for summer vacation, his mother and sister were shocked by the changes they witnessed. During his year-long separation, Austin had experienced significant physical changes, including significant muscle gain, but these changes were more than superficial. Austin's behavior became increasingly strange. He would say nonsense and claim he didn't need sleep. At first, his family did not take this seriously, but as night fell, they realized he was serious. Austin declared that he would guard the house and protect his family from unknown threats, and he kept his promise, wandering the hallways until morning. Every hour, he loudly checked on his mother and sister, reassuring them that they could sleep peacefully because he was guarding them. The next morning, his mother made him talk seriously and asked him if he had used drugs. Austin admitted that he had tried many different stimulants over the past year and described their effects on him. He even used a powerful synthetic drug that caused hallucinations, rage, and could be fatal if overdosed. However, he promised his mother that he had stopped using and was no longer in danger. Despite her concerns, Austin's mother did not seek help from professionals. As a pharmacist, she thought she could help her son herself. She gave him sedatives and sleeping pills to help him relax and sleep after a long, restless night. However, Austin only slept for a few hours before resuming his vigil, informing his family every hour that everything was quiet and under control. Over several weeks, Austin's behavior continued to deteriorate, but his mother refused to seek professional help from psychiatrists and did not even inform his father about the situation. On the morning of August 13th, Austin unexpectedly visited an old classmate who lived nearby. The classmate was stunned because they hadn't seen each other in over a year and Austin hadn't contacted her. When she asked why he came, Austin explained that he had forgotten the year of his birth and was looking for answers. The confused classmate replied that it was 1996, after which Austin abruptly turned around and left without saying anything. Austin's behavior scared and puzzled the girl, so she immediately called Austin's mother and told her everything, asking if the boy might be using drugs. This prompted the woman to call her ex-husband, who was working in another state, and express her concern that something was seriously wrong with their son. Austin's father flew to Florida the next day and, after speaking with his son, suggested he voluntarily check into a clinic for a medical examination, which Austin firmly refused. Austin's father then had a heartfelt conversation with his ex-wife, and together they decided to send Austin for a mandatory examination and subsequent treatment at a drug rehabilitation or psychiatric facility. However, they couldn't do it in time. A troubling revelation followed. The next day, Austin's friends invited him to join them at the beach because of the hot and sunny weather. His mother insisted that Haley accompany him to keep an eye on her brother. Austin was excited about the outing but dressed as if he were going to the mountains instead of the beach. He wore a thick athletic hoodie, long pants, boots, and ski goggles. When his friends saw him, they were silent at first, then burst into laughter. They teased him about his outfit and asked if he was okay. Austin became angry and shouted that if they thought he was crazy, he would prove it by threatening their lives. Austin's friend didn't take him seriously but stepped back just in case. Haley noticed Austin was on the edge of a breakdown and decided to talk to him to calm him down. In a private conversation, Austin confided to Harley that he believed he was half wild animal, immortal, and had superhuman strength. This frightened her, but she stayed calm to avoid provoking him. At the beach, Austin behaved normally. He joked, laughed, played volleyball, and had fun with his friends. As evening came, they all said goodbye and went their separate ways. Austin and Haley walked to a small restaurant near the coast to meet their father and his current wife. On the way, Austin told Haley he wanted to test his immortality by crossing a busy highway directly through the fast-moving traffic. When Haley realized what was happening, she chased after Austin and physically pulled him away, urging him to hurry because they were expected. Austin agreed that they shouldn't keep anyone waiting and quietly followed his sister. During dinner, Austin acted strangely again, getting up from the table several times to go outside, looking around as if he was afraid of someone, then returning. He then decided to tell his father and stepmother about his belief in his immortality. When his father calmly suggested seeking professional help, Austin leaped up, shouted that he wasn't insane, pushed his father forcefully, and ran out of the restaurant. After leaving the restaurant, Austin walked several miles and eventually wandered into a neighborhood he didn't recognize. There, an open garage with bright lights caught his attention, and he headed towards it. This home belonged to an elderly couple, 59-year-old John Stevens and 56-year-old Michelle Mishkin Stevens. In the evenings, they loved barbecuing and watching movies in their spacious garage, which they had set up like a living room. Married for over 25 years, they had 3 adult children who lived independently, allowing them to enjoy retirement and each other's company. That evening, John took their dog for a walk while Michelle prepared for their usual movie night. When Michelle noticed an unfamiliar young man on their lawn, she felt no threat and even asked if he needed help. However, the situation unexpectedly took a turn. Jeffrey Pfizer, the Stevens family neighbor who lived across the street, was on friendly terms with them. Around 9 p.m., he heard suspicious noises outside. When he looked into the yard, he suddenly heard Michelle's agonizing scream. Without hesitation, he rushed to help his neighbors and saw Austin near the garage. Jeffrey tried to pull Austin away, but Austin was overpoweringly strong and knocked Jeffrey to the ground. As Jeffrey tried to recover, Austin stabbed him several times in the back and shoulder. Realizing he was overpowered and needed help, Jeffrey ran into the Stevens family house to draw Austin's attention away from himself. After exiting through the back door, Jeffrey headed to his own home. Once inside, Jeffrey realized Austin had not followed him but had returned to attack Michelle. Jeffrey immediately called the police and emergency medical services, reporting an armed attack by a stranger with a knife and stating that both he and his elderly neighbor had been injured. After contacting emergency services, Jeffrey fell silent, listening closely. He eventually realized no one was outside his door. It seemed Austin had remained at Steven family's house, and now strange animal-like noises, resembling the growls of a wild beast, could be heard along with screams of terror and moans. It took the police about 10 minutes to arrive. But by then, it was tragically too late. The sight that awaited them was horrifying. Two officers approached the garage with weapons drawn, only to be halted in shock at the doorway. There, in a pool of blood, lay the lifeless body of Michelle Stevens. The autopsy later revealed she had suffered multiple blunt force traumas to the head and a stab wound to the chest. A bit further inside, in the dim light, two more individuals were on the ground. John was reaching out, pleading for help with a strained voice. Above him, Austin was seemingly choking him. The officers demanded that Austin release the victim, threatening him with their guns. However, Austin showed no response, and firing was too risky due to the possibility of hitting both people. Instead, one officer drew a taser and warned Austin. Only then did he see that Austin was not just assaulting but actually biting John's face, holding his head and neck firmly. Beneath John spread a vast pool of blood, with a chunk of flesh missing from his left cheek. And his lip, nose, and ear were also mutilated and seemingly chewed off. John was immobilized, barely able to move, silently pleading for help. The officers shocked the attacker with the taser, but he seemed unaffected, continuing to tear at John's face with his teeth. A kick to Austin's face only made him growl loudly and bite into Stevens's cheek again. Reinforcements arrived, including a police dog that was unleashed on the frenzied young man. The dog latched onto Austin's arm, but he seemed to feel no pain, breaking free and injuring himself further. A powerful kick from an officer finally disoriented Austin long enough to handcuff him. At this moment, Austin claimed he felt unwell, possibly having eaten something bad, before losing consciousness and convulsing. Emergency medical teams transported 4 individuals from the scene. Unfortunately, Michelle could not survive, and her husband John passed away on the way to the hospital due to severe blood loss from stab wounds and the trauma from the attack. Jeffrey, who reported the incident, survived, but he experienced permanent minor motor skill impairment in his right hand due to nerve and tendon damage. Austin fell into a coma after mistakenly ingesting a substance from a garage bottle, thinking it was alcohol, which turned out to be a chemical. He suffered severe burns to his esophagus and stomach and spent several days in critical condition, but medical professionals ultimately saved him. Austin, the attacker, spent nearly 2 weeks in a coma. Upon regaining consciousness, he claimed to remember nothing about the events of that day. Gradually, he began to recall having dinner at a restaurant and an argument with his father, after which he walked away. Austin described seeing a ghostly figure that guided him through dark alleys and unfamiliar neighborhoods until he saw a light in the distance. The light came from a lantern near Stephen family's garage, where John was preparing a barbecue and setting out food. When Michelle saw him, she was startled and called for help. Austin admitted to hitting her several times and then pulled out a knife, claiming he would rid her of evil. At that moment, a neighbor named Jeffrey Fisher intervened, but Austin, thinking Jeffrey was a demon, attacked him with the knife. After Jeffrey ran to get help, Austin continued to assault the woman until she was lifeless. He then noticed a bottle, mistook it for alcohol, and drank about half of it. Soon after, he heard a dog barking and a man's voice. Austin claimed he couldn't remember what happened next, according to his own statements. Initially, there was speculation that Austin was under the influence of strong drugs, which could explain his aggression and lack of sensitivity to pain. However, hospital tests showed no traces of drugs, medication, or alcohol in his blood. This led to the conclusion that Austin might have experienced a psychotic break, acting without awareness of his actions. Experienced psychiatrists were tasked with determining the truth of this claim. The case of Austin Harrouff attracted significant media attention due to its extreme brutality and ambiguity, both in the courtroom and psychiatric care. The children of the murdered couple, along with the relatives of the injured neighbor, believed that the young man was pretending to be insane and claiming memory loss to be declared incompetent and avoid harsh punishment. Most people following the case shared this belief. The state-appointed psychological and psychiatric expert, Dr. Landrum, reported that Austin's mental illness led to an acute psychotic episode, resulting in the deaths of Michelle and John. However, the prosecutor argued in court that he did not believe the defendant met the legal definition of insanity at the time of the crime. It was suggested that Austin's mental health had worsened due to experimenting with various drugs, using steroids, and having trouble socializing with peers since school. However, at the time of the crime, he was not under the influence of any illegal substances or alcohol, as none were found in his blood, indicating that the reasons for his violent behavior were another reason. During a court hearing, Austin's father disclosed that their family has a history of schizophrenia, and he worried that his son might have inherited this serious illness. Additionally, Austin was suspected of having clinical lycanthropy delusion, a rare disorder. This might explain why he acted like a wild animal and seemed immune to pain, although no psychiatrist confirmed this diagnosis. After receiving treatment, Austin was moved to jail, but the case remains unresolved. He is still awaiting trial, and his lawyers argue that he is mentally ill. Meanwhile, the relatives of John and Michelle and Jeffrey have expressed hopes in interviews that Austin will be deemed competent and sentenced to death for his terrible actions. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Hannah Clark. Hannah Clark was born on September 8, 1988. By 2020, she was a devoted mother of 3 young children, 2 sweet girls, Aaliyah and Liana, and a rambunctious boy named Trey. Hannah's loved ones remember her as a kind and gentle soul with a bright smile that could light up anyone's heart. She was a selfless and caring mother who gave her all to her children. Hannah's family life was marked by her relationship with her ex-husband, Rowan Baxter, a rugby player for the New Zealand Warriors team. Despite their significant age difference, they formed a strong bond, which deepened over time. Sue Clark, Hannah's mother, struggled to accept Rowan, but Hannah refused to listen to her concerns. People close to Rowan shared negative opinions about him. Sue, Hannah's mother, had a nagging feeling that something was off about Rowan. She perceived him as arrogant and self-centered, which made her uneasy. She was also concerned about the significant age gap between Rowan and Hannah. When they first met, Hannah was a recent graduate, while Rowan was 31 years old. Additionally, Rowan's past relationships were a worry for Sue, particularly since he was still in the process of divorcing his previous wife and was living with her at the time. When Hannah introduced Rowan to her parents, they questioned him about his ex-wife. Rowan explained that he was staying with her due to their son. Eventually, Rowan finalized his divorce and continued his relationship with Hannah. In 2011, he proposed to her, and she accepted. They got married in Kingsley, New South Wales, Australia. The following year, they had 3 children together. Hannah and her family, including her father Rowan, were passionate about sports. However, Rowan's muscular physique, developed during his professional athlete days, was partly due to steroid use, which led to mental health issues. As a personal trainer, Hannah's approach differed from her father's. She was loved by her clients for her kindness, empathy, and dedication, earning her a loyal following. Rowan's approach to training was unique, but his behavior was marred by aggression and inappropriateness, likely caused by steroid use. This made him a poor trainer, as clients don't need someone who makes them feel uncomfortable. Rowan struggled to communicate effectively with people, which negatively impacted his career and finances. As a result, his wife Hannah had to become the primary breadwinner, which further irritated Rowan. He felt emasculated by her success, as she was doing a better job than he was. Despite their financial struggles, they decided to open their own fitness club. However, this decision was largely driven by Rowan's desire to control Hannah's every move and monitor her whereabouts. Rowan's behavior in the store mirrored his past actions at the gyms where he worked. He often felt the need to assert superiority over women. During a private training session with Sue's mother, he showed his cruel side, acting inappropriately instead of showing respect. He dropped Sue, causing her to hit her head and bleed, and laughed at her clumsiness, showing no sympathy. Despite this alarming behavior, Hannah's parents tried to accept him for their daughter's sake. Rowan's control over Hannah was all-encompassing, and he isolated her from her family and friends. He dictated who she could see and when, and even forbade the children from visiting their grandmother and Hannah from communicating with her brother, whom he disliked. As a result, Hannah felt trapped and enslaved, confined to the walls of her own home. Rowan's behavior towards Hannah was also emotionally and physically abusive. He would demand intimacy from her, and if she refused, he would become enraged, taking out his anger on her and the children. After forcing himself on her, he would then apologize insincerely, attributing his behavior to a burst of passion. Hannah's life was slowly under the constant control and cruelty of her husband, Rowan. Their marriage, once filled with love and passion, had degenerated into a nightmare of fear and submission. Rowan's tyrannical behavior had created a toxic environment, where Hannah lived in constant terror of his wrath. Rowan's cruelty was not limited to Hannah, he also targeted their children. While some playful exchanges between parents and children are normal, Rowan frequently crossed the line, intentionally hurting and belittling them. When the children cried, he would mock them, showing no empathy or respect for their feelings. For example, a conflict between Rowan and his daughter Aaliyah turned disastrous when Rowan used excessive force, causing Aaliyah to hit her head. The injury was severe enough to require hospitalization and stitches. Instead of taking responsibility and apologizing, Rowan blamed Aaliyah for the incident. This was not an isolated incident, as Rowan had a history of tormenting his children. As an athlete, he would take ice baths after training, but he would also force his children, including his young son Trey, to sit in icy water, disregarding their tears and pleas for mercy. In the same year, Hannah's life took a drastic turn for the worse. Rowan, who had recently become interested in jiu-jitsu, returned home from a training session one day, still pumped up with adrenaline. Without warning, he physically attacked Hannah, grabbing her throat with a tight grip and uttering terrifying words. Consumed by fear, Hannah didn't immediately recognize that she was experiencing domestic violence. However, this incident was far more frightening than anything she had previously endured. As a result, Hannah made up her mind to leave Rowan at the earliest chance. After reaching out to the police, she provided a detailed account of the horrific experience to the officer. The police officer informed Hannah that forcing an intimate relationship without consent is a form of domestic violence. This conversation was a turning point for Hannah, helping her understand the situation and prompting her to take immediate action. She quickly gathered her children and left for her parents' house, trying to escape the abusive situation. Although their divorce was not yet finalized in November 2019, Hannah made the decision to allow Rowan to spend time with their children. However, she was aware that she had no legal authority to control this arrangement without a court's intervention. Even so, Hannah was still uneasy about leaving the children in Rowan's care. To fix his problem, Rowan was struggling to cope with his emotions and sought help from his church's pastor, Christopher. Christopher was a kind and supportive person who was always willing to listen. However, as Rowan began to open up to him, Christopher noticed some disturbing traits. Rowan had a desire for dominance and control, which he occasionally revealed when his confidence faltered. During one of these moments, Rowan confessed to Christopher that he was aware his actions were wrong and wanted to change, but didn't know how. Rowan's admission was a crucial step towards reform, and Christopher's guidance could have been instrumental in helping him. However, before progress could be made, a shocking event occurred. Hannah and her children were walking down the street when Rowan suddenly appeared out of nowhere, grabbed their daughter Lion, and disappeared. Hannah's life was turned upside down by unbearable anxiety and fear for her daughter Lion's safety. For 2 agonizing days, she had no idea where Lion was, and her distress grew by the minute. Hannah turned to the police, who launched a search and eventually found Lion safe and sound with her father. Although Lion was unharmed, the traumatic experience left a lasting impact on Hannah. The police, recognizing the danger that Hannah and her children faced, urged her to file a police report against her ex and obtain a protection order. However, despite the problems her ex, Rowan, had caused, he still had joint custody of the children, which he used to continue manipulating and abusing Hannah. After a meeting with Rowan, the children were returned to Hannah's parents. However, before leaving, Rowan attempted to humiliate Hannah by displaying pictures of her in her underwear on his car, in plain sight of their children. Hannah, enraged, tried to remove the photos, but Rowan responded violently. He grabbed her shoulder, twisted her arm, and punched her in the face, splitting her lip. The attack was only stopped when Hannah's mother, Sue, intervened. As Rowan drove away, he yelled insults. Hannah, traumatized, immediately reported the incident to the police, as it was a clear violation of the protection order. Unfortunately, the authorities were unable to respond in time, which ultimately led to a tragic outcome. It was a typical morning on February 19, 2020. Hannah grabbed her car keys and left her parents' house to drop off her 3 kids at kindergarten. Hannah and her children got into the car, but before they could leave, Rowan jumped in, causing Hannah to become frightened for their safety. She tried to calm Rowan down, but he was furious and began yelling threats and ordering Hannah to start the car and drive away. Hannah carefully drove off, trying not to escalate the situation. As she turned onto Raven Street, the car stopped. In a desperate and vengeful act, Rowan grabbed a canister of gasoline from under the car seat and drenched Hannah and her children with it. Michael ZCK, who happened to be nearby, witnessed the horrific scene. He said that earlier that morning, he had heard a car pull up outside his house. Hannah, frantic and pleading for help, screamed that Rowan was trying to kill her and pouring gasoline all over them. As Hannah begged for mercy, Rowan refused to let her go, his face twisted in a rage. Michael rushed to the car and was met with Rowan's emotionless face, holding a lighter in his hand. In the next moment, the car erupted in flames. The explosion was followed by blood-curdling screams, a deafening ringing, and then an eerie silence. Luckily, Hannah had narrowly escaped the inferno, but was left with severe burns and bleeding. Frantically, she pleaded for assistance, not for her own suffering, but for her children who remained trapped in the blazing car. A car happened to drive by, and a doctor who was not on duty stopped to offer assistance. Seeing Hannah's distress, the doctor rushed to her side. Meanwhile, Michael intervened quickly, grabbing a hose from his house to try and extinguish the flames. However, the fire was too intense, and it engulfed the entire car, leaving no hope of rescuing the children. The doctor and Michael yelled at Hannah to take cover and get away from the fire, but she was too consumed by grief to hear them. With growing desperation, Michael rushed to the car to rescue the children, but the intense flames and scorching heat thwarted his efforts. Hannah lay on the road, her body badly burned, repeatedly begging for someone to save her children. At that moment, no one grasped the full extent of the tragedy. Hannah's body was severely burned, with over 97% of her skin damaged, except for her feet. Despite her excruciating pain, Hannah's thoughts were consumed by her children, who were now left vulnerable and unprotected. Hannah's badly burned body left police doubting her survival chances. Yet, she refused to give up. With fierce determination, she provided a crucial testimony. Police officer Angus Cook carefully recorded every word Hannah spoke as she struggled to recount the events leading up to her tragic situation. With great difficulty, Hannah managed to name her ex-husband, Rowan Baxter, as the person responsible for her ordeal, and provided a detailed account of what had happened. As Hannah's voice grew weaker and her body frail, Officer Angus remained by her side, offering words of encouragement and praise for her bravery. He reassured her that she had already done enough and that everything would be okay. Hannah was on the brink of death, yet she didn't fully grasp the horror unfolding around her. When questioned about whether Rowan had threatened her earlier, she replied that he hadn't. As doctors approached to alleviate her suffering, she lost the ability to speak. Meanwhile, Rowan Baxter's behavior was erratic. Despite suffering severe burns covering 80% of his body, he managed to exit the car unassisted. Rowan sat on the road, staring at the burning vehicle. After a brief moment, he inexplicably climbed back into the car, which was engulfed in flames. A witness, putting their own life at risk, attempted to extinguish the fire at the back of the car. It was then that Rowan retrieved a knife from the vehicle and began to chase people away, preventing them from putting out the flames. The children, trapped in the burning car, had little chance of survival. Nevertheless, bystanders refused to give up their efforts to save them. Rowan refused to let anyone approach the car, claimed them to a horrific death. In a final, selfish act, he stabbed himself with the knife. Despite her own life-threatening injuries, her primary concern was for the health of her children and her desire to reveal the truth. Tragically, Hannah passed away in the hospital on the same day, at the young age of 31. Hannah was a victim of severe domestic violence, which also affected her children. She fought tirelessly to protect her family from their abuser, but sadly, her efforts were ultimately unsuccessful. Throughout her daily struggles, Hannah showed immense courage, standing up for her loved ones despite the numerous challenges she faced. For days later, a massive gathering took place to pay tribute to Hannah and her children. A lasting memorial, Hannah's House, was also created in Camp Hill, where a tree planting ceremony was held in her honor, accompanied by a plaque that tells the story of her life. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Antonia Barra. Antonia Barra was born on December 3, 1999, in Temuco, Chile, to a wealthy family. She was the youngest of 5 children, with 2 older brothers, Sebastian and Ignacio, and 2 sisters, Catalina and Carla. Antonia was particularly close to Catalina, whom she considered her best friend and confidant. Her parents valued education and encouraged their children to pursue their interests, including sports and music. As the youngest child, Antonia was especially loved and spoiled by her parents. Despite this, she was a diligent student and dreamed of studying tourism and traveling the world. At the age of 15, Antonia met Martín Pradinas on social media in 2015. Martín was 8 years older than Antonia and lived in the same city. He was divorced and had a child from a previous marriage. Little is known about Martín's early life, except that he was born in February 1992 in Temuco to Ivan Pronas and Paula Dare. When Martín was 20, he got a girl from his school pregnant, and to avoid scandal and punishment, he married her. However, the marriage ended shortly after the birth of their child. Martín and Antonia were acquaintances who knew each other from socializing with young people on social networks between 2015 and 2017. However, their relationship remained purely platonic. After Antonia graduated from high school and enrolled in university, she relocated to a different city, and they lost touch. At university, Antonia focused on her studies in the travel industry, formed new friendships, and explored new hobbies. Martín was no longer on her mind. During her breaks from university, Antonia would return to her hometown but primarily stayed in touch with her family, including her parents and siblings. During her time at university, Antonia developed a close bond with a fellow student named Consuela Erb, and they became nearly inseparable. She also started a romantic relationship with a student named Rodrigo Aguad, which lasted for approximately a year. However, they got into a dispute at the beginning of the new semester in September 2019 and decided to take a break from each other. Antonio had recently gone through a breakup and was feeling down. Luckily, the Chilean national holiday was just around the corner, offering a long weekend and a chance to take her mind off things. She and her best friend decided to attend an electronic music festival in the charming town of Pucón. They carpooled with 3 classmates, using Consuela's car. As it happened, close friends of Antonio's family owned a summer house in Pucón, and since the owners were out of town, they kindly offered Antonio and her friend the use of their house, even providing them with the spare key. Upon arrival, the group split up, and they friends settled into the spacious and cozy house, looking forward to a relaxing weekend getaway. On the evening of September 18th, Antonia ran into Martín while walking around the city, and they struck up a conversation. As it turned out, Martín was also in town for the festival with his friends and was staying in a large rented house just outside the city center. They hit it off and made plans to meet up the next day at a party at a popular nightclub. Antonia called her parents to fill them in on her plans, and her father warned her to be careful and not to drink too much. Antonia laughed it off and promised to be responsible. The next day, Antonia and her friends spent hours getting ready for the party, choosing outfits and doing their makeup. Before heading out, they shared a bottle of wine and then took a taxi to the club. When they arrived, they ordered a bottle of champagne at the bar and drank it together before hitting the dance floor. It was after midnight when Martín and his friends arrived at the club. Antonia was already quite drunk by then, but she continued to drink and dance with Martín. According to her friend, Consuela, Antonia was advised to slow down, but she didn't listen. At one point, Consuela lost track of Antonia and spent half an hour searching for her. When she finally found her, Antonia was in another room with Martín, barely able to stand due to her intoxication. Consuela saw her classmate Benjamin Morales at the club and asked for his help in getting her friend Antonia home. However, Antonia refused to leave, saying the night was still young. A short while later, she started to feel unwell, and her friends took her outside for some fresh air. After she felt a bit better, she returned to the club. Consuela went to Antonia later that night and told her that she was exhausted and ready to head home. However, Antonia declined, wanting to stay and continue having fun. Consuela then left the club, giving up on convincing Antonia to leave with her. She took a taxi home and went straight to bed. Benjamin saw Martine escorting Antonia out of the club, holding her because she was swaying from side to side. According to Benjamin, Antonia was too drunk to fight back, and Martine took advantage of her state. They waited near the entrance for a while, allowing Antonia to recover a bit. Soon, Martine's friends arrived and suggested they continue partying at their rented house. The company ordered a taxi, but Martine and Antonia decided to walk, as she was unwell and disoriented. Surveillance cameras captured their walk, showing the man supporting a drunk student who was trying to break free from his grasp. Along the way, they stopped at a 24-hour supermarket, where Martine purchased beer. Inside the empty store, Martine attempted to kiss she, but she pushed him away and turned her back on him. It was clear she was uncomfortable, but her intoxication left her unable to resist or escape. Martine, being stronger, continued to lead Antonia, and they eventually arrived at the rented house around 8 a.m. The people in the living room saw that she was upset, but she was too drunk to clearly communicate her distress. Despite Antonia's obvious unease, Martine continued to hug and try to kiss her. The other friends, also heavily intoxicated, failed to intervene. Eventually, they retreated to a bedroom, where the man assaulted she while she was in a dazed state. Antonia was confused and disoriented as Martine ignored her attempts to resist and stop him. After the incident, he rejoined his friends in the living room and continued the party, leaving Antonia alone in the bedroom. Later, around 9 a.m., she managed to call Benjamin, but her speech was slurred and she was crying uncontrollably, making it hard for him to understand her. She was unable to explain what had happened or where she was. Benjamin became concerned and called Consuela, telling her that Antonia was in trouble and needed help. Antonia then called Consuela herself, struggling to communicate, and eventually found out her location, prompting Consuela to go to her aid. When Consuela met Martine at the doorstep, she asked him what had happened, but he just smiled and claimed that everything was consensual. However, when Consuela found her friend, Antonia, in one of the rooms, she was shocked by her condition. Antonia was crying and begged to be taken away from the place as soon as possible. They left shortly after and went home, where Antonia immediately took a shower. Despite her friend's advice to preserve the evidence and report the incident to the police, Antonia insisted that no one should ever find out what had happened. She tried to act normally when she spoke to her parents later that day, hiding her true emotions. The next morning, Antonia and her friends returned to the student dormitory. In the aftermath, Antonia struggled to cope with the trauma. She tried to forget the nightmare and resume her normal life, attending classes and socializing with friends. However, only Consuela noticed that Antonia was not okay. As time passed, Antonia's mental state deteriorated, and she gradually fell into a deep depression. Antonia was traumatized and didn't want to talk to anyone about what had happened to her. She refused to file a police report, fearing that it would only spread the news and make things worse. However, rumors about her began to circulate quickly. They would whisper, point, and laugh at her. One of her classmates even had the audacity to ask her about the rumors in front of everyone. However, what sent Antonia over the edge was a phone call from Rodrigo, her ex-boyfriend, with whom she still had strong feelings and had been holding on to the hope of rekindling their relationship. During the call, Rodrigo repeated all the rumors he had heard and told Antonia that he never wanted to see her again. Antonia broke down in tears, trying to defend herself and explain that the rumors were not true. But Rodrigo was unforgiving, using derogatory language to describe her and calling her promiscuous before hanging up. This conversation was devastating for Antonia, and she couldn't cope with the emotional pain. On Saturday, October 12, 2019, Antonia went to her parents' house, seeking comfort and solace with her family. Concern for Antonia's well-being grew as her relatives noticed a deep sadness in her eyes, despite her claims that everything was okay. Later that evening, she posted old childhood photos on social media, accompanied by a distressing message. The following day, after dinner with her family, Antonia retreated to her room on the third floor. Her sister Catalina checked on her about an hour later, but Antonia asked to be left alone, saying she wanted to sleep. Catalina granted her wish, turned off the light, and bid her a loving goodbye before leaving the room. 2 hours passed before their mother, Marcela, came to Antonia's room to announce that dinner was ready. After knocking on the door with no response, Marcela entered the room and initially thought Antonia was asleep. However, upon touching her hand, she was met with an unsettling stillness. Devastated, Marcela screamed for help, and the rest of the household rushed to the room. In a state of panic, they called for emergency services while attempting to revive Antonia on their own before medical professionals arrived. Antonia's situation had become hopeless, and she tragically took her own life by overdosing on sleeping pills. The investigation into her death and the first attempts to hold the perpetrator accountable began. The news shocked her family and friends, as many were unaware of the severe emotional distress Antonia had been experiencing. As Antonia's parents sought to understand what had happened to their daughter, they spoke with her friends and classmates. They were shocked by the rumors and gossip that had been circulating about Antonia. Consuela, in particular, shared everything she knew, but the parents felt that more needed to be done. They hired a top private detective to help reconstruct the events leading up to Antonia's death and gather evidence to bring the person responsible to justice. Alejandro, determined to seek justice for his daughter, used his connections to organize a press conference. In front of dozens of cameras, he shared the devastating truth: his daughter had been the victim of forced bullying, which she had been unable to survive. The person responsible, he emphasized, remained at large. The detective reconstructed the timeline of events from that fateful night and gathered statements from several key witnesses, including Consuela, Benjamin, and a few other university students, who were willing to testify in court. With all the evidence collected, the Antonia family petitioned the court to arrest and prosecute Martín for his actions. However, the police determined that the evidence presented was insufficient to warrant taking him into custody. Martín claimed that everything that happened was consensual, although he admitted that both parties were intoxicated. Furthermore, the victim did not report the incident to the police. As a result, Martín remained free, and he and his family subsequently filed a lawsuit against the Antonia family, accusing them of defamation, harassment, and the unauthorized disclosure of their personal information. According to the Martín family, Antonia's relatives had slandered their son and brother, Martín. In response, the Martín family decided to hold a press conference to defend themselves publicly. They argued that Martín's reputation had been harmed without justification and presented themselves as the ones who had been wronged. The Martín family also accused Antonia of sharing their personal contact information, including their home address, phone numbers, and social media handles. As a result, Martín and his family received daily insults and anonymous death threats. The Martín family maintained that Martín's guilt had not been proven and that everything had happened by mutual consent. They expressed their willingness to defend Martín's case in court. Surprisingly, after this statement, the police supported the Martín family, causing Antonia's relatives to stop making negative comments about them and to stop sharing personal data. This sudden change was a major blow. This unexpected turn of events was a significant setback. Despite this, Antonia's relatives continued to seek justice with the support of the public. Victims who were initially silent about their experiences began speaking out after Antonia's case gained widespread public attention. Within a month, 8 more girls came forward to the police, claiming they too had been harassed and assaulted by Martín. They had previously remained silent, fearing they would be condemned and censured. One of the victims was just 13 years old at the time of the assault. As more girls who suffered at the hands of Martín began contacting the police, he was eventually taken into custody. Martín was arrested in June 2020 and held at Temuco City Prison on suspicion of committing assaults between 2011 and 2019. However, Martín was released on his own recognizance less than a month after his lawyer intervened and was allowed to remain free for the duration of the investigation. Furthermore, several lawsuits filed by the injured girls were rejected due to the statute of limitations having expired. There was a high likelihood that many cases would be disregarded. Out of 8 appeals, only 2 were registered by the court. The release of Martín from custody and the rejection of the victim's claims sparked widespread outrage. Protests and rallies erupted nationwide, with thousands demanding justice. In response, the prosecutor's office re-examined the case and pushed for a change in Martín's bail conditions, seeking to return him to custody. Meanwhile, the statute of limitations was lifted for all cases of violence committed by Martín. During his trial in February 2021, his social media messages were revealed, in which he boasted about his actions to friends. It was also discovered that Martín kept a collection of his victims' underwear at home, taken as trophies. This collection included items from victims who had previously reported him to the court, as well as a belonging of Antonia's. On August 26, 2021, Martín was charged with 9 counts of crimes involving sexual misconduct. 3 of the victims were minors when the incidents occurred. The Antonia family appealed to the public to speak out against violence and bring those responsible to justice. The trial began in June 2022, allowing Martín's lawyers sufficient time to prepare. They presented witness statements and surveillance footage showing that Antonia left with the defendant voluntarily and did not attempt to resist him. The defense challenged the testimonies of other victims, but in August 2022, the court delivered a guilty verdict against Martín. He was convicted of 8 crimes involving sexual misconduct and causing Antonia's nervous breakdown, which ultimately led to her death. Martín was sentenced to 20 years in prison. However, his lawyers, led by Pinus, promptly filed an appeal. On December 29, the Supreme Court ordered a new trial. In March 2023, Martín's case was assigned to the Public Defender's Office. During the new trial, Martín maintained his innocence, attributing the events leading to Antonia's death to the large quantity of alcohol they had consumed together. Despite this, on July 7, 2023, Martín was found guilty again. The court reduced his initial 20-year sentence to 17 years, considering the 3 years he had already spent in prison. He had only 14 years left to serve. However, Antonia's family expressed dissatisfaction with this decision in an official press release made by her father. They noted that no punishment could bring back their daughter. During the ongoing lawsuits, Antonia's family and other victims affected by Martín's actions joined forces with public figures to advocate for women's rights. Together, they worked to amend the criminal code, specifically the sections related to sexual offenses. Their objective was to protect the rights of victims of harassment and sexual violence. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Abril Perez Sagayan. Abril Perez Sagayan was born in 1971 in Monterrey, Nuevo León, Mexico. Her mother, Maria del Socorro, worked diligently 7 days a week to ensure her 3 children, Abril, Javier, and Ana, had the opportunity for the best possible education and a bright future. Even at a young age, Abril displayed an exceptional aptitude for science and made it her goal to pursue higher education and financial independence. As Abril matured, she embodied a unique combination of intelligence, compassion, and physical beauty. Her sociable nature and innate leadership qualities made her an inspiration to her friends and a standout professional in her field. She earned a bachelor's degree from the University of Nuevo León and a master's degree in business from the Monterrey Institute of Technology. As Abril's career progressed, she discovered her passion for digital sales and rapidly climbed the ranks. She attained a prominent position as an executive director at Bilbao Bank in the United States. During the early 1990s, a time when Abril's professional accomplishments were flourishing, she met Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez. Juan Carlos was an ambitious entrepreneur, born on November 11, 1968. Juan Carlos and Abril discovered they had a lot in common. Both had attended the Monterrey Institute of Science and Technology, where Abril studied and Juan Carlos earned his degree with high academic achievement. Juan Carlos had also studied at top U.S. universities, including the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard. With his education and experience, he considered himself a professional entrepreneur in e-commerce and financial technology. Juan and Abril became inseparable, collaborating on projects and socializing in the same friend circle. As time passed, their friendship blossomed into romance. After a few years of dating, they decided to tie the knot, and their wedding took place in 1994. Their collaboration led to numerous successful projects, including the online stores Pag Mobile and Plascom. They also played a key role in the development of the Dem store, which became a leading e-commerce platform in Mexico. By 1999, their life appeared to be a perfect fairy tale, with both partners achieving great success in their careers and enjoying a happy relationship. Their joy was further amplified with the birth of their first child, Ana Cecilia, in 2001. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, Juan Carlos Jr., followed by another son, Julio Andres, in 2005. Despite their busy schedules, Abril prioritized her children's needs, taking care of them personally and attending their school activities. Abril's devotion earned her the respect and admiration of those around her. Juan Carlos was also a dedicated father, and together they created a seemingly ideal family that many people envied. However, behind the facade, the family was struggling with difficulties, and all members suffered due to Juan's short temper. Juan was a cruel man who frequently lashed out at anyone who crossed his path. His behavior towards his wife, Abril, began with verbal abuse, making her feel uncomfortable and hurt with his insulting words. Over time, the situation worsened, and Juan started using physical violence against Abril, regularly beating her. Abril attempted to conceal the abuse from her friends and family, fearing that she wouldn't be able to provide for their children on her own. She believed that staying with Juan would give their children a better future. However, by 2009, the situation had become so severe that others began to suspect what was happening in the family. Abril has always kept it a secret from her friends and family, but whenever they asked about a possible divorce, she insisted that she wouldn't leave Juan. By 2014, Juan had reached the pinnacle of his career, becoming a prominent figure in Amazon's retail industry in Mexico. A year later, when Juan became the director of Amazon in Mexico, the family had to relocate to Mexico City. Abril hoped that the change of scenery would resolve their problems, but unfortunately, the abuse continued. Juan Carlos presented himself as a loving husband and father to the public, but behind closed doors, he was abusive and controlling towards his wife, Abril. He would often post on social media about how much he loved her, but in reality, he was constantly accusing her of cheating and even hired a private investigator to gather evidence. Despite his successful career, which included becoming the director of e-commerce at a multinational company, his marriage was deteriorating. The tension between him and Abril became unbearable, and after a trip to Monterrey to celebrate Christmas with her family, she realized she couldn't stay in the marriage any longer. During the trip, Juan's anger boiled over, and he physically attacked Abril, grabbing her by the neck and strangling her. He had received a photo from the private investigator of Abril with a male colleague, which he mistakenly believed was her lover. In reality, the man was just a coworker. Abril decided not to engage with Juan's accusations and instead filed for divorce on January 4, 2019. They had already separated and planned to inform their children about their impending divorce. However, the situation took a violent turn one early morning. Abril was asleep when she was suddenly struck on the head with a baseball bat by her partner, Juan. Initially disoriented, Abril thought the ceiling had collapsed, but as her vision cleared, she saw Juan standing over her. She attempted to push him away and escape, but he overpowered her, prompting her to scream for help. Their 16-year-old son rushed to his mother's aid, quickly assessing the situation and intervening to prevent Juan from causing further harm. He managed to get Abril away from Juan and escorted her out of the house to seek emergency medical attention for her injuries. After the incident, Juan took to social media to share his side of the story. He made several posts claiming that Abril had been unfaithful, stolen his money, and wasted 26 years of his life. He also alleged that Abril had physically attacked him, stabbing him in the chest with a knife. To support his claims, he attached photos of the knife and what appeared to be bloodstains. One of Juan's friends responded by recording a video asking people to share the information. However, Juan's posts became increasingly bizarre. At one point, he even posted a message claiming that Abril had taken her life, despite being clearly alive. This move remains puzzling to this day. Meanwhile, Abril had been recovering in the hospital. After her discharge, she immediately filed a police report against her husband. The authorities sided with her, granting her custody of their 2 children and ordering Juan to pay 6,000 Mexican pesos, approximately $1,350, in monthly alimony. However, this amount was deemed insufficient to cover the costs of raising their 2 minors. After overcoming her initial fear and financial struggles, Abril began a new chapter in her life, driven by her determination to create a better future for her children. She relocated to Monterrey with her kids, where she attended Juan Carlos' trial and filed for divorce. Reflecting on her traumatic experience and the abuse she suffered, Abril reevaluated her life. She joined a Christian organization that supported families and started working as a divorce counselor. Her ultimate goal was to establish a support system for women who had endured similar abuse, just as she had. As Abril worked towards rebuilding her life, the court proceedings against Juan Carlos continued. 9 months after the attack, Juan was formally charged with attempted murder. The case was then brought to court, where Judge Federico Mask ordered Juan's informal arrest. Consequently, Juan was incarcerated for several weeks. Juan appealed the verdict, and on November 3, 2019, Judge Hector Jimenez reviewed the case. He found the hospital photographs and Abril's testimony, along with that of her son, insufficient to prove Juan's guilt. The judge also believed that if Juan had intended to kill Abril, he would have done so. Additionally, he considered the baseball bat used in the attack to be a blunt object, rather than a deadly weapon. As a result, the charges were downgraded, and the preliminary arrest was cancelled. With only a few hearings remaining, the outcome of the case was uncertain, causing Abril and her loved one significant anxiety and frustration. In a desperate attempt to have her concerns heard, Abril wrote to the judge, expressing her fears for her life and pleading for him to consider the threat Juan posed. However, her letter was ignored. Juan then began a custody battle for their children. Abril was forced to leave Monterrey and travel to Mexico City for the remaining hearings. She also had to subject her children to psychological evaluations, as Juan had claimed in his lawsuit that Abril had manipulated them into rejecting him. A week before a critical court hearing, Abril sat down with her 3 children to express her love and wishes for their future. She encouraged them to chase their dreams and find the strength to forgive their father. This conversation seemed like a farewell, as if Abril sensed that it might be her last opportunity to reassure her children of her love. On November 25, 2019, Abril followed her ex-husband's instructions to avoid potential legal issues that could have led to her separation from her children. She traveled to Mexico City, coincidentally on the same day that thousands of women marched in the streets to commemorate the International Day Against Gender-Based Violence on March 19, 2021. The court reclassified a case involving violence against Abril, which occurred in January 2019, as attempted murder. This decision was made after Abril's relatives and the prosecutor filed several petitions for judicial review, ultimately leading to the cancellation of the original decision. 2 months later, on May 23, the remaining suspects in Abril's murder case were apprehended, including 3 women and 1 man. The investigation resulted in the issuance of 3 search warrants and 8 arrest warrants. During the first search, 48-year-old Amanda Vicente Rodriguez was taken into custody. A series of arrests were made in connection with a recent crime. In the Jardín de Morelos colony, 34-year-old Mabel Montelier Morena and 48-year-old Garcia Alicia Flores Valdez were taken into custody, and their mobile phones were seized. Another arrest was made in the Alvar Aragon colony in Mexico City, where 50-year-old Isa Jalil Castillo, also known as Aguirre or Alvar's godmother, was detained. At the same time, 9 gang members were apprehended, with 7 of them allegedly linked to the Abril case. However, one suspect, Juan Carlos, remained at large, prompting authorities to reissue a warrant for his arrest. General Prosecutor Ernesto Godoy explained that the initial warrant was for attempted murder, while the new one was for the actual killing of a woman. Despite efforts to locate Juan, he remained elusive. In a surprising turn of events, a man named Rolf, also known as El Chalón, contacted the authorities and claimed to have information about the case. During questioning, he revealed that he was the one who had actually pulled the trigger and taken Abril's life. The perpetrator, Rodolfo Daniel Bendis, eventually pleaded guilty to the crime. He claimed that Juan Carlos had promised to pay him $10,000 to carry out the crime. According to Bendis, Juan Carlos had contacted him while he was in pre-trial detention and provided him with the address of Abril in Mexico City. Juan Carlos allegedly instructed Bendis to spy on Abril and provided written instructions on how to commit the crime. He also promised to provide Bendis with a gun in Monterrey. However, when Bendis arrived in Monterrey, no one contacted him, and he did not receive the gun. He returned to Mexico City and did not hear from Juan Carlos again until after his release from prison. Upon his release, Juan Carlos contacted Bendis again and informed him that the plan had changed. He now wanted Abril to be killed in Mexico City, as he had managed to lure her there. The case was divided into multiple hearings due to the complexity of the judicial system. The first trial began in August 2022, with Bendis and Juan Carlos as the initial defendants. During this trial, the prosecution presented 28 witness statements and 14 pieces of expert evidence. During the recent trial, a key defendant known as El Sean Gallen testified about his role in planning and committing the crime of feminicide, for which he had previously pleaded guilty. On May 19, 2023, the court delivered its verdict, finding Rodolfo Danielo Baza and Juan Carlos Rodriguez guilty and sentencing them to 52 years in prison. Additionally, they were ordered to pay approximately 56,000 Mexican pesos, $30,000 US, in damages. Following the trial, they men were taken to a detention center to begin serving their sentences. However, the Abril family immediately announced their intention to appeal the verdict, as they believed the sentence was too lenient. They pointed out that Rodolfo was the one who fired the fatal shots. As for the remaining defendants, it was previously decided in October 2014 that their trials would be divided. This decision was met with an appeal from prosecutors, who argued that it would significantly delay the proceedings and result in unnecessary additional costs for the court. The tragic case of Abril continues to affect her family and the wider Mexican society, and despite the recent verdict, the trials are not yet over. After the court hearing, Abril got into a car with her children and their lawyer. She asked the lawyer to drive them to the airport for their flight back to Monterrey. En route, they stopped at an intersection where a motorcyclist pulled up beside them. The motorcyclist, who was actually a hired assassin, shot Abril multiple times in the head. Luckily, her children, who were seated in the back, escaped serious harm. One child, who was lying down, was grazed by a bullet but suffered only minor injury. Abril was rushed to the hospital, where doctors fought to save her life. Despite their efforts, she succumbed to her injuries 6 hours later. The lawyer immediately contacted Abril's family to inform them of the tragedy. Her brother Javier traveled to Mexico City to handle the aftermath of the incident. The community suspected Juan Carlos of being involved in the crime, but the authorities took a different stance. Since the shooter's identity and motives were unknown, they couldn't classify the case as femicide and make an arrest. Instead, the case was initially treated as a murder, and the police launched an investigation to gather evidence that could potentially prove it was a femicide. Abril's friend took to social media to accuse Juan Carlos, but her account was deleted as a result. Abril's family was fearful that the perpetrator would go unpunished and sought to raise public awareness about the case through social media. The fact that Abril died on a day dedicated to fighting gender-based violence added a deeper significance to her death. The family organized protests and marches to demand justice for Abril. Following Abril's tragic death, social media erupted in outrage as people realized that she had repeatedly expressed her fear of her abuser, only to be ignored by the authorities. Her family and friends held a funeral mass at the Benito Flores Chapel in Monterrey, where dozens gathered to pay their respects and demand justice for Abril. The funeral procession then proceeded to the Pantheon Garden in Los Angeles, where Abril was laid to rest. Her case has sparked widespread attention to the issue of gender-based violence, particularly in cases where judges release men who have attacked women. Abril's ex-husband, Juan Carlos, was released from prison after appealing his sentence, and was able to track Abril down to Mexico City, where he ultimately took her life. In response to Abril's case, the Mexican General Prosecutor's Office has launched an investigation into the judges who allowed Juan Carlos to be released from prison. The judges in question, Carlos Trillo Rodriguez, Federico Mosa Gonzalez, and Hector Jimenez Lopez, are being investigated for their roles in Juan Carlos' release. Additionally, representatives of the party of former Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador are calling for Judge Mosa's removal from office, citing his involvement in a previous controversial case in which he released a doctor who had disrespected a patient in a public hospital. The judge initially declined to charge Juan Carlos with femicide, instead only charging him with sexual violence, after which he was released from custody. During the public outcry surrounding the Abril case, Rafael Guerra, the president of the Supreme Court of Mexico City, suspended all judges involved in the case on November 29. Mexico City's head of government, Claudia Sheinbaum, stated that the government would investigate Abril's death. She also warned that the judges involved in the case could be held accountable for Abril's death if it was proven that Juan Carlos was responsible. Local and international media reported that Juan Carlos was released despite evidence against him. Abril's family established a non-profit organization called The Voice of Abril to provide support to victims of violence, including information, psychological assistance, and legal aid. The public demonstrations sparked by Abril's death prompted the prosecutor's office to reclassify the case against Juan Carlos, seeking to prosecute him for attempted murder, which could result in his imprisonment. After being charged, Juan Carlos took to social media to claim that he wanted justice for the crime against Abril and that the perpetrator should be punished. He also stated that he was willing to cooperate with the police, despite having a troubled marriage with Abril, and he would never have wanted her to meet such a tragic end. However, his post sparked widespread discontent among the community. His 18-year-old daughter, Ana Cecilia, publicly spoke out against her father, accusing him of physically and mentally abusing her, her siblings, and Abril over the years. She shared disturbing photos of Abril's injuries after being attacked with a baseball bat. Anna described her father as a narcissistic sociopath who allegedly bribed his way out of prison. During the ongoing investigation and protests, an arrest warrant was issued for Juan Carlos, but it was not directly related to the Abril case. Instead, it was due to him violating judicial duties. Although he was released on the condition that he would check in with the police station weekly, he failed to do so. After missing 2 court hearings, Judge Agustin Monra Gaspar Canel was left with no choice but to issue the order. Juan wrote a letter claiming he feared for his life and did not want to attend the hearings, stating he and his family had received death threats since Abril's death. He believed someone would seek revenge if he appeared in court. However, the judge rejected this excuse and issued an arrest warrant, also restricting Juan from leaving the country. The investigation continued, aiming to uncover the truth. A letter from Juan was discovered, in which he again denied involvement in Abril's death, claiming he never intended to harm her. He described the night of the incident, stating that Abril had initiated a fight, stabbing him in the side, and he had hit her with a bat in self-defense. The letter sparked outrage among those who heard it, with no one believing Juan's account. The investigation has revealed that Juan Carlos is the primary suspect in the case. Further investigation by the police has identified at least 7 other individuals involved in the crime against Abril. This conclusion was reached after reviewing surveillance footage from the area where the events occurred. The footage shows 2 cars following Abril as she left the courthouse. The drivers of these cars were in contact with the perpetrator who fatally shot Abril. After the attack, the perpetrator and their cars fled the scene. Although the identities of the pursuers were not yet known at the time, the investigation suggested that Juan Carlos may have been involved in the crime. According to investigators, Juan Carlos likely met these individuals while he was in prison and paid one of them to protect him. After his associates were released from prison, Juan Carlos was also released. He then paid them to kill Abril. Notably, Juan Carlos was the only one who knew Abril's route to Mexico City, as he had requested to meet her. After the shocking details of the case became public, no law firm was willing to defend the suspect, Juan Carlos. Meanwhile, Abril's loved ones and colleagues cooperated fully with law enforcement, providing any information that could aid in his capture. However, sources from the General Prosecutor's Office soon revealed that Juan Carlos had managed to flee Mexico by crossing the border into the United States. Mexican authorities swiftly alerted Interpol, which launched a global manhunt for Juan Carlos. As a result, he became a wanted man in over 151 countries, with authorities determined to apprehend him at all costs. By the end of January 2024, the case had gone cold, with no new leads or updates. 4 years have passed since Abril's tragic death, yet the true perpetrators remain unpunished. Her children are now living with her family on the outskirts of Mexico City, holding on to the hope that justice will eventually be served. The question on everyone's mind remains, where is Juan Carlos? His capture is still the top priority for the authorities. Abril's family has vowed to continue fighting for justice until Juan Carlos is found and brought to justice. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Su Xingqi. Tam Xing Fai, a 43-years-old faculty member, was noticeably absent from work, sparking concern among his colleagues. On July 4th, a co-worker named Ma tried to reach him on his mobile phone at 11 a.m., but there was no answer. Ma wasn't immediately worried, assuming Tam Xing Fai was busy taking care of his family's adopted dog, which had a skin disease and was scheduled to visit the vet. However, when Xing Fai failed to show up for a meeting at the university's finance department on July 5th, Ma's concern grew. He tried calling Xing Fai's mobile phone again, but there was still no answer. Unfortunately, Ma didn't have Xing Fai's landline phone number, so he couldn't try contacting him that way. By July 6, Xing Fai had been absent from work for 2 days with no communication with his colleagues. One of his co-workers finally reported the situation to the finance department, which prompted Xing Fai's superiors to call his landline phone. Unfortunately, no one answered that call either. The police contacted the library where Helen Tong Yanyi, the 33-year-old wife of the missing man. Library staff reported that she was also absent from work without prior notice. They, originally from Zhongshan in Guangdong Province, China, had been married for 11 years and had 2 daughters, Hiu Man, 10, and Hiu Ing, 7 years old. Despite their difficult living conditions and financial struggles, the family was known to be kind, happy, and cheerful. They lived in an abandoned recycling station on Huazhu South Road, but Xing Fai often took his daughters on outings to have fun in town. Their children were well behaved, and the family seemed to be a happy one. Given their circumstances, it was possible that the family had decided to take a vacation together. However, something unexpected must have happened, preventing them from returning. Xing Fai's colleagues repeatedly tried to contact him by phone, hoping for a response. Eventually, someone answered, but to their surprise, it was a middle-aged man with an unfamiliar voice, not a member of the family. A man claiming to be Xing Fai's cousin called his workplace, stating that the family had taken a summer vacation to Guangdong Province in mainland China. He allegedly received Xing Fai's phone for safekeeping, but couldn't provide a return date for the family. However, the call only heightened suspicion among Xing Fai's co-workers. They found it out of character for Xing Fai to suddenly leave without notice, as he was a diligent and organized person. If he planned a vacation, he would have arranged it with his children's school in advance. Moreover, the family was responsible for 9 stray dogs, raising concerns about who would care for them. Xing Fai's family situation also raised questions. His father, a sailor, had gone missing, and his mother was living in a nursing home due to illness. Xing Fai regularly visited her every week, making it unlikely that he would abandon her to go on vacation. Eventually, the police were called. One of Xing Fai's colleagues accompanied them to his home, an abandoned recycling station in Pingqi village. During the trip, a suspicious person was spotted. A short man was seen from a distance near the Xing Fai family's fence before quickly disappearing. Initially, no attention was paid to this, and they continued on. Upon arrival, they found the gate to Xing Fai's home locked. The police investigated the property and interviewed the neighbors. The abandoned recycling station covered a large area of approximately 450 square meters, but most of it was empty space, about 350 square meters of flower beds. The construction area was only about 90 square meters, and the building was constructed illegally. The original owner had built several tin houses on the site, using it as a waste recycling facility. A stone house on the opposite side was used as a pig farm, with very few people living in the area. As a result, the police only had one neighbor to question, an elderly woman named Wang who lived alone across the street. Wang claimed to have known the family's schedule and reported that they usually tended to their garden in the afternoon. Su Wang had limited knowledge of the family's personal lives, mainly due to their remote location. She was aware that the family didn't receive many visitors, and the only relative she knew of was Xing Fai's cousin, Su Xingqi. Wang didn't have information about Su Xingqi's address or that of Xing Fai's uncle, who supposedly lived in a nearby stone house. When the police questioned Xing Fai's colleague, they learned that a cousin had answered Xing Fai's phone, leading the police to believe it was Su Xingqi. However, Wang clarified that she didn't know Su Xingqi's address. She did report hearing cries for help from the house on July 5. In response, the police conducted door-to-door inquiries in Pingqi village and eventually tracked down a man matching Wang's description at a stone house on Huazhu Road. The man, 42 years old Zhu Shengqi, confirmed that he was Xing Fai's cousin and stated that he occasionally visited the family home to help with renovations and gardening. When questioned about the phone call, Zhu Shengqi maintained that the family had gone on vacation to China. On July 5, Xing Fai visited his mother at the nursing home and then returned home to inform Zhu Shengqi that he planned to travel to Dongguan, China for a few days. Due to the high roaming fees, Xing Fai asked Zhu Shengqi to hold on to his Hong Kong mobile phone until he returned. The person seen fleeing the scene by police and Xing Fai's colleague was actually Zhu Shengqi, who was leaving after feeding the family dogs. Zhu Shengqi's behavior and expressions were observed, and he appeared to be telling the truth. His story seemed consistent, and there were no obvious discrepancies. When asked if he had a key to the family home, Zhu Shengqi denied it. Despite finding Zhu Shengqi, the police continued their investigation. Going door to door in the village. A local resident reported a stranger borrowed money from a villager, leading to a heated argument. The villager threatened to seek compensation from Xing Fai's family, who were struggling financially due to his mother's hospitalization and existing debts. The villagers initially believed the stranger was not Zhu Shengqi, but they suspected the family might be hiding to escape their debts. However, when the police inquired about Zhu Shengqi, the villagers revealed that he had been dishonest. They confirmed that Zhu Shengqi regularly visited the Xing Fai's home to perform maintenance and repairs, and he was always able to enter the house on his own, even when no one else was present. This information led the police to conclude that Zhu Shengqi must have had a key or access to the home Xing Fai's. In fact, he did have a key, which Xing Fai had given to him, as witnessed by Wang. When the police asked Zhu Shengqi for the key, he initially denied owning one, claiming he used a spare key for renovations that he had returned. However, his demeanor had changed, and he was avoiding key details. When the police threatened to search his home, Zhu Shengqi became agitated and suddenly remembered another house key that he had not returned. He retrieved the key from his dresser and handed it over to the police. Although Zhu Shengqi's behavior was suspicious, there was no direct evidence linking him to the family's disappearance. As a result, the police placed him under surveillance while continuing their investigation. During their investigation, police used a spare key to enter the home, where they found a scene of disarray and evidence of a ransacking. Fresh blood stains on the walls suggested that a violent incident had occurred on the property. The presence of a sink full of dirty dishes in the kitchen raised suspicions about the family's claim to have traveled to China, as it seemed unlikely they would have left their home in such a state before departing. A search of the master bedroom turned up the family's identification cards in a dresser, which prompted the lead investigator to contact the border crossing office. The office reported that the family had not left Hong Kong. Further investigation of the house uncovered a blood-stained shirt in a side room and a blood-stained plastic water pipe in the corner. Police then deployed sniffer dogs to search for additional evidence and potentially locate the missing family members. The dogs detected a scent and discovered blood stains under recently disturbed soil 9 meters away. Furthermore, despite it being summer vacation, their children, Hiu Man and Hiu Ain, were enrolled in summer school, indicating that the family would not have been on vacation. It became clear that the family had been victims of a crime, so a special team was set up to investigate. Due to the late hour, the police cordoned off the scene, restricted access to Pingqi village. Zhu Shengqi was confined to home. He was the prime suspect in the case. Zhu Shengqi promptly confessed. According to Zhu Shengqi's statement, he was from Huanpu in Guangdong province and typically resided with his sister, wife, and 2 sons, aged 15 and 16, who suffered from memory issues. Zhu Shengqi previously earned a living selling motorcycles in Junction City. However, Following Guangdong's ban on motorcycles in 2006, sales plummeted. Financial struggles led him to reach out to his cousin, Xing Fai, in Hong Kong, seeking employment opportunities. Xing Fai helped Su Xingqi secure a construction job that provided a daily salary of 500 Hong Kong dollars, including accommodation and meals. After working for half a month, Su Xingqi became dissatisfied with his salary, which was reduced to 220 Hong Kong dollars due to company deductions. He impulsively quit his job and returned to China. However, in 2007, a typhoon damaged his home, and he needed money for repairs. Su Xingqi asked Xing Fai to help him find work in Hong Kong again. When Xing Fai couldn't find him a job, he proposed an alternative arrangement. Xing Fai would pay Su Xingqi from his own salary to help with household chores and repairs at his home. Su Xingqi accepted this offer and began traveling to Hong Kong every other month to work on Xing Fai's home and garden. Su Xingqi claims that he and Tong Yanyi, Xing Fai's wife, began a clandestine romantic relationship. However, Xing Fai discovered their relationship on July 3rd. On July 5th, Su Xingqi accompanied Xing Fai to a nursing home to visit his mother. Su Xingqi snuck out of the nursing home to return home and continue his affair with Yanyi. Unexpectedly, Xing Fai returned home early and, in a fit of rage, physically confronted Su Xingqi. In a state of panic, the man grabbed a 25-centimeter-long fruit knife and stabbed Xing Fai until he fell to the ground, dead. Overwhelmed by what had just happened, he wanted to turn himself in to the police. However, Su Xingqi refused to let that happen. Since he couldn't change his mind, Su Xingqi decided to kill Xing Fai. Su Xingqi found some wires in the corner of the room, charged at him, knocked him to the ground, and tied his hands behind his back. Su Xingqi then covered Xing Fai's mouth and nose with tape and put a plastic bag over his head. Before this, their two children were in their bedroom watching cartoons. They heard the commotion and their parents warning to run away, but instead, they ran towards their parents and saw their father dead and Su Xingqi in the process of killing their mother. The children ran back to their room, crying, and locked the door. Since the parent was already tied up, Su Xingqi left to pursue the children. Su Xingqi picked up a pair of pliers, opened the door, and used more wires to restrain the children. He tied their hands behind their backs, covered their mouths and noses with tape, and put plastic bags over their heads. The children, Hiu Ing and Hiu Man, also suffocated shortly after. After killing the whole family, Su Xingqi was at a loss of what to do next. He turned to his home to think it over. He thought that hiding them in a ditch or body of water would be too easy to find, and that dismembering them would be too exhausting and time-consuming. So he settled on burying them on their own property. On July 6th, he returned to the home to try and clean up as many blood stains as he could find. He then got to work on digging the hole. He dug a hole deep and wide enough to hold the family of 4 and quickly placed their bodies inside of it. He also disposed of the murder weapons in the pit before filling it back in. The police believed Su Xingqi's story, despite being skeptical about his motive, and took him to the location where he claimed the crime had taken place. He pointed out the spot where the sharp knife, water pipe, iron pliers, and other tools used in the crime were hidden. On July 7th, the police called in the fire department to assist in unearthing the remains. The firefighters arrived with excavation tools and gas masks, as the bodies were buried near a septic tank. However, they quickly encountered a problem when they hit a layer of cement while digging. It turned out that Su Xingqi had failed to mention in his confession that he had filled the pit with cement before covering it up. The firefighters were unable to break through the cement with their tools, and the police had to call in a private engineering company for assistance. The engineers arrived with high-grade tools and began drilling through the concrete slab. However, when they reached a point where they saw human hair, they became uneasy and refused to continue digging, not wanting to encounter a dead body. It took the police 13 hours to persuade them to resume the excavation. After excavating the pit, authorities found it to be 2.5 meters wide and 6 feet deep. The bodies of the 4 family members were discovered at the bottom, all barefoot and wearing only t-shirts and shorts. Xing Fai's body was at the very bottom. His hands and feet were bound with electric wire, and he had multiple stab wounds to his abdomen, back, and neck, with his clothes stained red with blood. The other family members were similarly bound with electric wire. Yanyi's mouth and nose were covered with tape, her hands and feet were bound, and her face was distorted. 2 family members, Hiu Man and Hiu Ing, showed no obvious signs of trauma, leading police to suspect they may have been buried alive. Su Xingqi was formally arrested and interrogated. During the interrogation, he altered his confession. He admitted that he lied about the affair. Shan Hui kicked Su Xingqi out of the house and banned him from returning. Despite this, Su Xingqi came back to apologize and was surprisingly forgiven by Xing Fai. Su Xingqi returned to the house on July 3 to start working, and it seemed that his relationship with Xing Fai had been repaired. However, on July 4, Su Xingqi attempted to molest a family member. Su Xingqi fled the house in a rage, not wanting to alert the neighbors. The next day, Su Xingqi tried to force his way into the house again, claiming he wanted to apologize. However, Xing Fai had anticipated this and returned home early. They got into an argument, which escalated into Su Xingqi stabbing Xing Fai. Su Xingqi's later confession matched his initial one, but with the additional detail of filling a makeshift grave with cement. However, after the bodies were taken away for autopsy, it was discovered that Su Xingqi's account of the events was inaccurate. The autopsy revealed that Xing Fai's murder was more brutal than initially described. Xing Fai had sustained 9 stab wounds to the head and neck, nearly 80 stab wounds to the body, and 10 stab wounds to the hands and feet. Contrary to Su Xingqi's claim, Xing Fai was strangled, not suffocated with a plastic bag. Hiu Ying's cause of death was the only accurate part of Su Xingqi's account. Forensic analysis of the home found at the cutlery and dishes did not have the family's DNA on them, but they did have Su Xingqi's DNA. This suggested that Xing Fai was not killed in the kitchen, but rather elsewhere in the house. The investigation also revealed that the murder was premeditated, as the cement used to bury the bodies had been purchased by Su Xingqi prior to the murder. Furthermore, the weapon used was not a kitchen knife from the family, but rather one belonging to Su Xingqi. Additional investigations by the police found that the family's bank cards had been used at an ATM after the time of death, but no money could be withdrawn due to repeated failed PIN number guesses. The cash and bank cards belonging to the family were also missing. Su Xingqi's motive for the crime was robbery, and it was premeditated. Whenever the police pointed out inconsistencies in his story, he would suddenly come up with a new explanation. According to Su Xingqi, his family's ancestral home in China needed urgent repairs, and his 2 children required 100,000 in cash to cover their school fees. He was not well liked in his local community, so he knew it would be difficult to borrow money from his neighbors. He turned to Xing Fai for help because his business trips to Hong Kong had not generated enough income. Su Xingqi suspected that Su Xingqi was wealthier than he seemed and that he is very stingy. The reason for his low salary during his time working for Xing Fai was that they were exploiting him for low-cost labor. On July 3, Su Xingqi traveled to Hong Kong without informing anyone and waited until July 5, when they had a day off from work. When Xing Fai returned home and found Su Xingqi there, he asked if he needed to cook something, and they men went to the kitchen together. Su Xingqi asked to borrow 1 million Hong Kong dollars, but Xing Fai rejected the request. He explained that he had to use the money for his mother's medical treatment and his daughter's education. However, Su Xingqi didn't believe him and accused Xing Fai of only using him for cost labor. Xing Fai became angry and ordered Su Xingqi to leave. As Xing Fai turned his back, with a concealed knife on Xingqi attacked him from behind, covering his mouth and stabbing him. Su Xingqi then restrained in Hiu Ying and Hiu Man and began searching the house for cash and bank cards. He demanded to know the password for the bank cards, and Xing Fai intentionally gave him a fake password. Su Xingqi didn't realize this at the time. Su Xingqi claimed that he had killed others by covering their mouths and noses with tape and putting a plastic bag over their head. However, when he went to the nearest ATM to withdraw cash, he discovered that the PIN number he had been given didn't work, and realized that Xing Fai had lied to him. Upon returning home, Su Xingqi discovered that everyone had suffocated to death in his absence. He found the food he and the others had been preparing and decided to eat it next to the 4 corpses while contemplating how to dispose of the bodies. After stealing $6,000 in Hong Kong dollars from Xing Fai's body, Su Xingqi buried the corpses and tools in a small pit, then went to sleep at Xing Fai home. The next morning, Su Xingqi realized that the smell from the bodies might lead to their discovery, so he bought cement and returned to the home. He dug up the pit, poured in the cement, and refilled the hole. Su Xingqi then stayed at the home to answer any calls to Xing Fai's cell phone or house phone, telling callers that he was taking care of things while the Xing Fai family is on vacation. However, Su Xingqi did not expect his ruse to be uncovered so quickly. Even later, he continued to lie about many details, including when he bought the cement and the cause of Yan Yi's death. At this stage, the police didn't think they needed to continue obtaining an accurate confession. In their opinion, they had collected enough evidence to proceed. The trial took place at the Hong Kong High Court on October 28, 2010. Su Xingqi initially pleaded not guilty and altered his previous statement. He claimed that his original story about the affair was true and that Xing Fai was killed in self-defense, while Hiu Man and Hiu Ying were killed accidentally. The defendant stated that he had falsely confessed to extortion and murder brutality, which included physical abuse and suffocation. On November 23, the jury delivered a unanimous guilty verdict for the murders of Xing Fai and Yan Yi. However, the defendant was acquitted of murdering Hiu Ying. Despite this, the defendant received a life sentence for the 3 counts of murder and 1 count of manslaughter. The presiding judge criticized the defendant, describing him as lacking a conscience and being unrepentant. The judge also accused the defendant of fabricating the self-defense story and affair to tarnish the victims' reputations. After Xing Fai's family death, who lived in Hong Kong, surprisingly defended him. They accused Xing Fai of being a hypocrite and the real villain. According to them, Xing Fai was exploiting Su Xingqi for cheap labor and taking his money. However, the neighbors and residents of Ping Chi village were outraged by these claims, forcing Su Xingqi's family to move back to China to avoid the backlash. The crime was considered one of the most shocking in Hong Kong's history. The community showed an outpouring of support for the family Xing Fai's, with many visiting their home to offer condolences. Netizens also raised more than enough money to cover the funeral expenses. Additionally, the family's 9 stray dogs were adopted by another family. Every year on July 5th, the adoptive family would take the dogs for a walk in Ping Chi village, near the home of their former owners. On August 9, 2022, 55-year-old Su Xingqi passed away in Hong Kong's Stanley Prison due to liver cancer. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Ana Rosa Barrera. Ana Rosa Barrera, a 40-year-old woman. She lived in a commune in the Santa Maria department, near Córdoba City, in the province of Córdoba, Argentina. People close to her described Ana Rosa as a courageous and adventurous person who was not afraid to start over and move forward with determination. Reports indicate that Ana Rosa lived in a tent for 4 years, although the reasons for this are unclear. She worked at the Secretariat for Children, Adolescents, and Families in Córdoba, a job she truly enjoyed. Additionally, she and her partner, Marcelo Favio Ferretto, ran an upholstery workshop together. They met when Ana Rosa started working for Marcelo's business. By 2017, Ana Rosa and Marcelo had been in a 10-year relationship. They shared a common interest in Reiki, a practice that involves using the palms to promote physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. Despite this common point, they still have problems in the relationship. Ana Rosa and Marcelo each have 4 children from previous relationships. As for Ana Rosa's family, her parents, brothers, and sisters reside in Córdoba. About Marcelo, he was a wallpaper maker with a workshop near their home. People close to they described Marcelo as a jealous and controlling person, which annoyed Ana Rosa. On Sunday, May 28, they visited relatives in Villa Lende, but the trip was marred by a heated argument sparked by Marcelo checking Ana Rosa's phone. The argument continued at their home, with neighbors hearing them shout and insult each other until the early hours of Monday morning. Later that day, Marcelo reported Ana Rosa missing to the police, although the exact timing of the report is disputed in media accounts. Most reports agree that Marcelo filed the report at the 18th police station on Tuesday, May 30th. According to Marcelo, claimed to have woken up at 6 a.m. on Monday to find Ana Rosa already gone, which he thought was unusual since she typically got up early to feed their dogs before leaving the house. He repeated this account to both the police and the media. Marcelo said he last saw Ana Rosa on Sunday night and then Monday night before going to bed. According to some sources, Marcelo realized something was wrong when Ana Rosa's colleagues called him, wondering about her absence. They knew she would never miss work without a good reason. Marcelo recounted the events leading up to her disappearance, saying that on Monday, he came across Ana Rosa's white Chevrolet while running an errand at the local pharmacy. Not long after, police discovered an abandoned car on Rainier Avenue outside a beauty salon in the Santa Isabel neighborhood. The location is about halfway between their home and Ana Rosa's workplace. Inside the car were her belongings and keys, but her cell phone was nowhere to be found. According to Marcelo, he tried to contact her, their friends, and their children also left messages, but no one received a response. The last message Ana Rosa sent via WhatsApp was at 10:40 p.m. Sunday, May 28. Ana Rosa's relatives all said that the circumstances surrounding Ana Rosa's disappearance are unclear. Marcelo has maintained regular contact with police since filing the report and has also attempted to locate Ana Rosa through social media and news outlets. In an interview with reporters, Marcelo shared Ana Rosa's plans on the day she went missing, which included an early morning swim at a gym and a scheduled appointment with a doctor. Marcelo emphasized that his primary concern is Ana Rosa's safe return home. Prosecutor Legendro Peralta Tanilo of Alta Gracia assumed control of the case, and the investigation commenced. Multiple theories were initially proposed, including the possibility of Ana Rosa being a victim of kidnapping, robbery, or revenge. The option of her leaving voluntarily was also considered. As part of the investigation, Marcelo testified for over 14 hours on Wednesday, May 31st. However, his statements became increasingly inconsistent, raising suspicions among investigators. Marcelo's claims raised suspicions among detectives due to inconsistencies and shifting demeanor. Initially, he was confident and gave frequent interviews, but later emphasized his innocence, providing unsolicited details and justifying himself by discussing his relationship with Ana Rosa. As time passed, Ana Rosa's loved ones became increasingly desperate due to the lack of progress in the search. Meanwhile, the investigative authorities persisted in their efforts to solve the case. The prosecutor leading the investigation was convinced that Marcelo was withholding information and urged the investigators to scrutinize him more thoroughly. On Friday, June 2nd, during another meeting with police officers, Marcelo's demeanor shifted. He became more composed. However, when detectives showed him data from cell phone towers that contradicted his alibi, Marcelo became dismayed and ultimately revealed the truth. He admitted to killing Ana Rosa, running her over, and then dismembering her body to get rid of the evidence. After confessing to the brutal crime, Marcelo revealed the location of the dismembered body of Ana Rosa. Following the Marcelo confession, the police, aided by a canine unit, found Ana Rosa's remains at approximately 2:30 p.m. in a hole dug by Marcelo on a dirt road in the countryside, near a factory. The location was familiar to Marcelo, as he frequently visited the area for work-related purposes. It became clear that Marcelo's previous statements were false, except for his mention of a quarrel that occurred early Monday morning. According to the reconstructed events, Marcelo and Ana Rosa had been arguing the entire weekend before she went missing. Marcelo's intense jealousy sparked the violence. In the heat of an argument, Marcelo used a sledgehammer to hit Ana Rosa multiple times until she died. He then tried to put her body in the car but failed. Instead, he used a knife to dismember her body. He placed Ana Rosa's remains in the car and began moving to her burial site. After pleading guilty, authorities conducted a search of the defendant and Ana Rosa's home on Friday, where they discovered various tools, including machetes and knives of various sizes. Marcelo was then arrested and facing charges of capital murder, a crime that could carry a sentence of life in prison. Prosecutor Peralta Atima explained that the defendant's statement, in which he took responsibility for the crime, was not considered a formal confession. Instead, the record shows that he admitted to the crime during an interview as a witness. A formal statement will be made in the coming days, once sufficient evidence is gathered to support the charges. This evidence will include the final autopsy report, forensic analysis of vehicles and items found during searches, and the results of luminal tests. Marcelo's lawyer, José Luis Saca, stated that the police statement had no legal weight and could not as evidence. Furthermore, the defense announced that the defendant would not testify. Over the weekend, investigations continued, and on June 5th, the preliminary autopsy report was released. The report concluded that Ana Rosa's cause of death was severe head trauma. On June 9th, it was discovered that luminol tests had been conducted at the home where Ana Rosa and Marcelo lived. The tests showed a large amount of blood had been cleaned up. The medical examiners also discovered new details during the autopsy, including knife cuts on the victim's extremities. A cut, 18 centimeters long and 7 centimeters deep, was found on the victim's neck, reaching the cervical region. Based on these findings, the prosecutor's office charged Marcelo with double aggravated murder. Almost 2 years after Ana Rosa's murder, Marcelo's trial began. The prosecution explained the seriousness of the charges to the jury. According to the autopsy results, Ana Rosa suffered a severe initial blow to the face, which left her unconscious, followed by multiple blows to the head that crushed her skull. At the first hearing, Marcelo decided to stay silent. The court then heard testimony from witnesses. Deborah Territorios, Ana Rosa's daughter, testified that after her mother met Marcelo, she became increasingly distant from her children and other family members. Deborah stated that she and her father moved to a different city, followed by her older siblings, which made it harder for them to communicate with their mother. However, when Deborah spent time alone with her mother, Ana Rosa was loving and caring. But whenever Marcelo was around, her mother would pull away. Deborah even had to leave her mother's house quickly on occasion because Marcelo was expected to arrive soon. Ana Rosa's cousin, Roberto Enrique Reina, also testified. He witnessed their argument on May 28, 2017, which started at his house. According to Roberto, the argument began when Marcelo saw a message on Ana Rosa's phone. The prosecutor's indictment highlights Marcelo's control over Ana Rosa, including a power imbalance in their relationship and objectifying her in front of others. Fernando, a co-worker and friend of the victim, Ana Rosa, explained that after she started dating Marcelo, she initially grew distant from everyone, but then she tried to reconnect. System. Fernando added that Marcelo seemed to imitate Ana Rosa's actions, even taking Reiki classes shortly after learning she was also taking. According to the indictment, Ana Rosa told a friend that after starting energy harmonization therapy, she felt better and was able to improve her relationships with family members. She also planned to visit her son in Bolivia. However, as Ana Rosa's life improved, Marcelo became increasingly aggressive. Fernando reported that Marcelo once lashed out when Ana Rosa said women with positive attitudes could achieve their goals, he calling women idiots who would end up dying in a ditch. On the second day of the hearing, Claudio Bustamante, the police officer who took Marcelo's statement, testified. He told the jury that Marcelo had spontaneously confessed during the interrogation without any pressure from him. According to Bustamante, Marcelo stated that Ana Rosa had told him on Monday that she was no longer satisfied with him and was cheating on him, which made Marcelo angry and prompted him to hit her, although he couldn't remember what he used to hit her. On April 11th, the 11th Criminal Court's jury delivered its verdict, finding Marcelo Favio fair guilty of the murder of Ana Rosa Barrera. The sentence was life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 35 years, conditional on good behavior. Upon hearing the verdict, Ana Rosa's relatives burst into tears and shouted at Marcelo, labeling him as a murderer and wishing him to spend the rest of his life in prison. The prosecutor in charge of the case stated that the jury's decision aligned with the prosecution's request. The evidence showed that Marcelo Favio Fair had acted with full awareness and premeditation in planning Ana Rosa's murder. According to the prosecution, Marcelo's attempt to appear mentally unstable at the time of the crime was a tactic to evade the maximum sentence. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Vashti Seacat. Brad Seacat was born on March 3, 1976, in Kingman, Kansas, to Janet Seacat and her husband, whose identity and background remain undisclosed due to a previous marriage. Janet had a son, Robert, from a prior marriage, making Robert Brad's older half-brother. The Seacat family has a history of good law enforcement, leading to a strict and disciplined home environment. Although details about Brad's childhood are scarce, it is known that he attended high school in Kingman. Brad was physically strong and athletic, which led him to participate in high school wrestling and bodybuilding. His efforts paid off as he excelled in inter-school tournaments, often taking first place and gaining recognition as a star wrestler and prominent figure in his school. At 16, Brad met Vashti Seacat at a major wrestling competition at the Kansas City Coliseum. Vashti was born on March 21, 1977, in Argonne, Seward County, to Julie Hosteler and Clinton Forrest. She was the third of 4 children, with an older brother, Rich, and sister, Catherine, and a younger sister, Tyler. Vashti was a social person with many friends, but she struggled with feelings of inadequacy. However, this didn't hold her back from becoming a cheerleader for her school's wrestling team. She enjoyed watching the team win and attended every match, including the one where she met Brad. Brad was immediately smitten with Vashti and asked her out. Impressed by his confidence, she accepted, and they felt an instant connection at their first meeting. From that moment on, they were inseparable. After high school, Vashti attended a university, while he followed in his family's footsteps by enrolling in the police academy. As a result, they spent less time together, which caused Brad was starting to exhibit controlling and possessive behavior. Over time, Brad's growing jealousy became unbearable for Vashti, and she eventually ended the relationship. Although the breakup was not dramatic or traumatic, it marked the end of their romance. After graduating from the police academy, Brad joined the sheriff's department in Sedgwick County, a short distance from Kingman. Despite his professional accomplishments, he couldn't shake off the feeling of emptiness. He still had strong feelings for Vashti, and his love for her lingered deep within him. Brad didn't abandon his dream of reuniting with Vashti, and as soon as the chance presented itself, he visited her. His words struck a chord with Vashti, who sensed his sincerity, possibly due to his devotion to faith or genuine affection. This led her to decide to return to him. Overjoyed by her decision, Brad hastily approached Vashti's family to express his true intentions and request her hand in marriage. The Seacat family was thrilled to hear the news, convinced that their marriage would be a successful one. The wedding took place in 2004, after which Brad and Vashti settled in a neighborhood in Kingman. As they began building their new life, they befriended Monty Weldon, a friendly neighbor who frequently invited them to backyard barbecues. Brad's unpleasant behavior causing problems due to his controlling personality. However, when Vashti became pregnant, their issues appeared to fade away. In 2006, they welcomed their first son, Brandon, and 2 years later, their second son, Bronson. Although Brad was a loving father, he sometimes had a rough way of interacting with the children, especially during playtime. He treated the children like adults and occasionally showed a more aggressive side. Brad's behavior was concerning. He once beat a prisoner by hitting his head against a concrete wall, causing a fractured skull and brain damage. The prisoner later died from his injuries. Brad was sued for using excessive force, but his boss, Sheriff Gary Steve, supported him, and the charges were eventually dropped. The prosecutor's office and the Kansas Bureau of Investigation dismissed the complaint, clearing Brad of any wrongdoing. Brad showed no remorse for his actions and even admitted to his colleagues that he liked to use violence, especially against individuals he considered bad people. On a separate occasion, Brad and another officer restrained a defendant who became unruly and resisted being removed from the courtroom for contempt of the judge. This incident earned them recognition, and the police chief awarded both officers bronze medals for their actions. On the other hand, Vashti wants to pursue her career despite her love for her children. She searched for a job and succeeded with her efforts. She became the new human resources director at Vito Communications Company. However, Brad seemed unhappy about her new role. He wants Vashti to focus only on family work and her children's education. As a result, he started complaining about Vashti spending too much time at the office. The number of arguments between Vashti and Brad increased significantly. Despite her best efforts to repair their marriage for the sake of their children, Vashti feels her efforts are in vain. She had a feeling that their situation would eventually end in disaster. To resolve the conflict, Vashti and Brad began attending sessions with social worker Connie Sodman. During her first sessions, Vashti expressed feelings of extreme loneliness and isolation, suggesting that couples therapy sessions might be their last hope to save their marriage. Every time Vashti mentioned the possibility of divorce, Brad became angry. For weeks, he repeatedly threatened to kill her if she left him, boasting that he could take her life without consequences because he was a police officer. He claimed he could make her murder look like a suicide, and even mentioned burning down their house to destroy the evidence. After the argument, Brad threatened her, saying that if Vashti pursued a divorce, he would prevent her from seeing their children, even taking them out of the country if necessary. At the same time, Brad left his police job and began working as a self-defense instructor at the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. Meanwhile, Vashti continued to attend therapy sessions and made positive changes in her life, such as exercising regularly and eating healthier. A few months later, Vashti's social life began to flourish. She makes new connections at work and meets someone she is attracted to. However, she confided in her sister about her new relationship out of fear that Brad might find out and take revenge. Vashti openly shared with her colleagues about the various threats she received from her husband. Unbeknownst to her, Brad discovered her personal diary and brought it to his office, where he scanned and printed out many pages. He then spends his days researching topics including suicide, fire injuries, and the difference between murder and suicide. In the first week of April 2011, Vashti had her final counseling session with Connie to prepare for her divorce from Brad. Together, they created a safety plan for Vashti and their children. When Brad received his divorce papers on April 29, he overreacted. After discovering the papers, Brad finds a projector in the pantry and uses it to enlarge a handwritten note from Vashti's diary. At the same time, he also wrote a farewell message to his children. What's amazing is that he also printed out documents on how to disguise a murder as a suicide. Additionally, Brad asked the maintenance staff how to properly destroy computer hard drives, and he used a blowtorch to destroy them because they contained images that were unfavorable to him. Then he threw the rest in the trash. Later that day, Brad bought gas at a convenience store and put it in his truck. That evening, he asked Vashti if he could spend the night at home to say goodbye to his children and promised to leave the next morning. However, he also tries to persuade Vashti to reconsider the divorce and becomes increasingly threatening when she refuses to change her mind. Vashti and Brad had a disagreement that evening, which resulted in Vashti going to bed exhausted around 3:15 a.m. Meanwhile, Brad entered the bedroom with a gun and shot Vashti in the neck. A neighbor who was awake and watching TV thought she heard gunshots but felt it wasn't concerning enough. Brad then staged his suicide by placing the gun next to Vashti's body. He poured gasoline into the hallway and upstairs bedroom and took Vashti's phone to call himself, creating an alibi. After getting his children, Brendan and Bronson, to a safe location, Brad started a fire. The fire spread quickly, engulfing the main room and igniting the remaining cartridges in the gun. At 3:45 a.m., neighbors were startled awake by the fire. Shortly thereafter, at around 7 a.m., Brad called 911, reporting that his wife had taken her own life. When emergency responders arrived, the first floor of the house was on fire and Brad was waiting in the car with his children. A police officer asked if anyone was still in the house, and Brad said that only his wife was there. He fabricated a story that Vashti had shot herself out of depression, and before doing that, she asked him to take the children to a safe place. Brad claimed he tried to save Vashti but was unable to do so because of the intense smoke and fire. When firefighters finally extinguished the blaze, they discovered Vashti's body on the bed in the master bedroom. An important detail attracted the attention of investigators. A .44 caliber revolver was found below Vashti's body, the barrel pointed toward her feet, and a 5-gallon gasoline barrel lay middle of the bed. 2 days later, investigators found Vashti's diary in her car, which contained a handwritten note and a suicide note. Forensic examination revealed that Vashti died instantly from a gunshot wound to the head and also suffered gunshot wounds to the torso and thighs. However, blood and lung tests showed no signs of smoke or carbon monoxide inhalation, which is typically present in the body of a person killed in a fire. The extent of the burns on Vashti's body made it impossible to determine whether her death was a murder or suicide. Police discovered some inconsistencies in Brad's story. It is worth noting that there was no dirt, blood, or wound on his body. Additionally, the position of the gun with the barrel pointing downward raises suspicions that this was not a suicide. Special Agent David Fetty of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation questioned how the gun came to be under the body. He pointed out that if Vashti shot herself while lying down, the gun would fall to the floor. If she sat up, the gun would still be on the right side of the bed. Furthermore, the trajectory of the bullet does not support the theory that Vashti shot himself behind the right ear. David decides to investigate further when some details don't seem to add up. Police found documents explaining how to make a murder look like a suicide. While analyzing Vashti's diary entry, they noticed her handwriting did not match her other entries. Forensic scientist Dennis McFarland concluded that the note had been tampered with. Witnesses also reported seeing Brad destroy a computer hard drive the day before. A neighbor who heard the fatal gunshot testified that the incident occurred at 3:15 a.m., 45 minutes before Brad called 911. This information confirms David's suspicions that something is wrong. Police arrested Brad on May 13, 2011 and charged him with first-degree premeditated murder and 2 other counts related to putting his sons, Brendan and Bronson, in danger. During interrogation, Brad claimed that Vashti felt insecure and depressed because of their troubled marriage and his threats to take the children away. Brad also claimed that after filing for divorce, Vashti was overcome with depression and remorse, so she set a fire and shot herself. However, the police did not believe his story. The trial began on June 10, 2013. Deputy Attorney General Amy Haley shared her account of the events with the jury, emphasizing that no one was more aware than the police of the devastation of fire and its destructive ability to erase evidence. Regarding the projector, the defendant claimed that he only used this device for practical training to guide students. A forensic examiner testified about a forged letter and the destruction of a hard drive. The defendant claimed that he destroyed the hard drive to protect personal information, not to hide anything. The defendant's attorney, Roger Falk, argued that Vashti had suffered from depression since high school, a condition that had worsened after taking some kind of sedative. Brad's brother testified in court, corroborating his brother's account that Vashti had been depressed and sad for weeks before her death. In contrast, therapist Can reported that although Vashti was initially depressed due to marital circumstances, it was not a clinical mental health problem. The therapist said Vashti has been very worried about her future lately. Vashti's brother also recounting the emotional turmoil Vashti's children had endured as a result of their parents' circumstances. The prosecution portrayed Brad as a manipulative person who used his police powers to distort the truth. Yet the defense repeatedly argued that Vashti's death was a suicide and pointed out that even the medical examiner could not determine the cause of her death. Brad testified in his own defense, describing himself as a loving husband and devoted father who was saddened by his wife's desire for a divorce. Kingman County Judge Larry Solomon was accused by Brad that the judge had an incentive to rule against him to win a nomination to the Kansas Supreme Court. However, the jury ultimately found Brad guilty of premeditated murder. Judge Solomon sentenced Brad to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years and an additional 6 years for other crimes. Brad will not be eligible for parole until he has served more than 31 years. In handing down the sentence, the judge took into account Brad's not guilty plea, his dishonest attempt to avoid responsibility, and his lack of remorse. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Isabella Rodriguez. Isabella Rodriguez was born in Colombia in 1975 and moved to Florida with her family in the 1990s. They obtained U.S. residency and eventually citizenship in 2002, when Isabella was 27. She married William Hellman, but they divorced in 2015 after a decade together. Isabella then met Louis Bennett online, and they began a romantic relationship. In 2016, Isabella and Louis had a daughter named Amelia. 6 months later, they purchased an apartment in Delray Beach, a city on Florida's Atlantic coast. They married the following month, in February 2017. At the time, Isabella worked as a real estate agent, and Louis owned a small solar panel company. On April 30, 2017, Isabella flew to the Caribbean island of St. Martin to meet Louis, leaving their 9-month-old daughter with relatives. They planned to spend a week on the water, returning home to Florida on Lewis's sailing catamaran. After stopping in the British Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, they arrived in Cuba, where they stayed for a few days. On May 14th, the catamaran set sail from Varadero, Cuba, bound for Florida. Isabella called her sister 3 hours later to say she would be home the next day. At around 1 a.m., Lewis sent out a distress signal to the U.S. Coast Guard, reporting that his ship had collided with an unknown object and was sinking. He also reported that his wife, Isabella, was missing. A Coast Guard helicopter crew located Lewis in a life raft around 4 a.m. and took him to Key West Island, the southernmost part of Florida. The catamaran was found floating upside down at dawn, but had not yet sunk. During an interview with investigators, Lewis explained that he and Isabella took turns keeping watch. At the time of the accident, it was Isabella's turn, and Lewis was asleep in his stateroom. He woke up to the sound of the collision and rushed on deck, but couldn't find Isabella. He called out her name, but she didn't respond. Lewis suspected that the loose mast might have knocked her overboard. Lewis also stated that the last time he saw Isabella, she was wearing a life jacket. When he was rescued, a Coast Guard rescue swimmer noticed that Lewis's backpack was unusually heavy. Upon inspection, officers found 225 collectible coins in the backpack, but their origin was unclear. Isabella Hellman went missing on May 15th, prompting a 4-day search and rescue operation by the Coast Guard. As no signs of her were found, the operation was officially ended on May 18th. The authorities were suspicious when Lewis Bennett, Isabella's husband, requested a letter from the Coast Guard stating that his wife was presumed dead just 24 hours after the search had ended. The Coast Guard denied the request, as it was outside their jurisdiction to issue such a certificate. 6 days later, Lewis announced on TV that he was traveling to Cuba to rent a boat and continue the search for his wife on his own. However, just 3 days after making this statement, Lewis claimed to have already returned from Cuba and met with Isabella's sister, saying he had checked hospitals but found no signs of her. Lewis expressed his despair and resignation to the situation, stating he was struggling to accept that his wife might be gone. He described Isabella as his soul mate and someone he thought he would be with forever. The next day, Lewis and the police attempted to retrieve his daughter from his wife's family, but they refused to relinquish her. Lewis ultimately took custody of his daughter with the help of the police, despite the scandal surrounding him. During the dispute, Isabella's sister repeatedly accused Lewis of being responsible for Isabella's death. Lewis's calm behavior and actions after his wife's disappearance raised suspicions among both Isabella's family and the police. Investigations revealed that Isabella and Lewis had frequent arguments after the birth of their child. Family, friends, and neighbors all confirmed this. Isabella had confided in loved ones that Lewis wanted to move to Australia, but she was opposed to leaving the United States. On May 30th, Lewis gave an interview in which he denied any involvement in his wife's disappearance. He claimed they had plans for a happy life together, but now he was alone and their daughter would grow up without a mother. While investigating Isabella's disappearance, the police also looked into the origin of valuable coins found among Lewis's belongings. It was discovered that Lewis had previously worked as a first mate on a yacht. The captain of that yacht had a collection of 617 rare coins worth around $100,000, which was discovered a year earlier. While the yacht was unoccupied and docked in the Caribbean, thieves broke in and stole the coins on board. Although the perpetrator was not caught at the time, the yacht's captain later identified the coins found on Lewis Bennett as part of the stolen loot, now that the FBI was investigating their origin. This new information led the FBI to obtain a search warrant for Lewis's apartment. Previously, 225 coins had been found among his belongings when he was rescued. On June 16, 2017, the search of his apartment uncovered an additional 162 gold coins hidden in a closet. Meanwhile, Lewis had relocated to England, where his parents lived, and had taken his daughter with him. However, due to financial difficulties, he returned to the United States and settled into an apartment valued at $125,000, while also receiving insurance payments for a lost catamaran. On August 28, 2017, Lewis Bennett was arrested in Florida and charged with stealing coins. He pleaded not guilty. A few days later, a federal judge set his bail at $250,000, which Lewis was unable to pay. As a result, he remained in custody while awaiting trial. Additionally, Lewis attempted to have his wife declared dead. Lewis benefited from his wife Isabella's disappearance by gaining control of their shared property and bank accounts. However, the judge refused to declare Isabella dead twice, as the investigation into her disappearance was ongoing. In a separate case, Lewis pleaded guilty to stealing coins and transporting them to the United States in November 2017. Lewis's parents asked the judge to be lenient when sentencing him, citing the fact that his daughter had already lost her mother. In February 2018, Lewis received a sentence of 7 months in prison followed by 3 years of probation. On the same day, Lewis was charged with second-degree murder in Isabella's death. Authorities believed he intentionally caused the catamaran they were on to crash, which was allegedly a staged event to cover up the crime. The prosecutor's case was based on a claim that Lewis wanted to inherit Isabella's wealth to pay off his debts and take their young daughter to live in Australia. Isabella had expressed fear of her husband in text messages a few months before her death, stating that she felt he no longer respected her. She expressed fear about returning home. In a message sent months before her disappearance, Isabella wrote, "If you no longer like or love me, let's resolve this immediately. It's sad how you treated me the entire time." An inspection of the catamaran before it sank revealed that the portholes below the water line were left open. The damage to the dual hulls seemed to originate from within the vessel, near the water line. The water line is the point where the surface of the water meets the hull of a floating vessel. An expert hired by the FBI analyzed photos and videos taken by the U.S. Coast Guard of the catamaran before it sank. The expert concluded that Lewis's account of the events was not credible. The analysis suggested that the vessel did not sink due to accidental damage, but rather appeared to have been intentionally scuttled. A professor of nautical architecture and ocean engineering at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy testified in court that the Coast Guard found no evidence of a collision that could have caused the catamaran to sink. Divers inspecting the vessel were cautious due to the risk of collapse, and eventually, the catamaran sank to a depth of over 4,000 feet, preventing a detailed inspection. 2 years after Isabella Hellman's disappearance, a judge officially declared her dead. Palm Beach County Circuit Judge Scott Suskauer issued a series of orders stating that Isabella was presumed to have died on May 14, 2017. Despite the passage of time, Isabella's body has not been found, and she has not contacted her family. Based on the available evidence, it is presumed that Isabella is deceased. The statement said, in January 2019, U.S. District Judge Federico Moreno suspended Lewis's February sentencing hearing in Miami and rescheduled it for May 28, saying he would not act until Isabella's family could personally visit her daughter Amelia, who turned 3 in July. In November 2019, Lewis pleaded guilty to manslaughter, and the second-degree murder charge against him was dropped. Before the plea deal, he faced a possible life sentence for second-degree murder, but the new charges limited his maximum sentence to 8 years in prison. According to a document filed with the court, Lewis claimed he didn't remember what he was doing when he discovered his wife was missing. He didn't search for her on the catamaran or in the water, nor did he use flares to signal for help. Instead, Lewis packed his belongings onto a life raft and then intentionally damaged the catamaran to make it flood, allowing him to escape on the raft. Prosecutors stated that Lewis waited 45 minutes after realizing his wife was missing to call for help. Notably, the U.S. Attorney's Office pointed out that Lewis was an experienced sailor with training in emergency procedures, having previously sailed from St. Martin to Australia. Don't understand why he failed to use his knowledge to respond to the emergency situation. Prosecutor states that Lewis admitted to being negligent in handing over control of the catamaran to his inexperienced wife, Isabella, resulting in her falling overboard and drowning. Despite being an experienced sailor with a Royal Yachting Association certification, Lewis failed to ensure Isabella wore proper safety gear. In contrast, Isabella had no formal sailing training or experience, and Lewis knew it. Lewis received training in emergency procedures, including man overboard protocols and night sailing safety, but Isabella did not. The prosecutor notes that only Lewis knows the full story of what happened on the catamaran that night. Following Lewis' guilty plea, Isabella's family, through their lawyer, expressed their immense pain and asked Lewis to show remorse. They stated that while Lewis can never undo the harm caused by taking Isabella away, he continues to cause additional pain by depriving them of contact with his and Isabella's daughter, Amelia. Isabella Hellman's family is grieving and missing her dearly. Although they have had limited contact with her daughter Amelia through 3 FaceTime calls, they have not been able to see or hug her in a long time. They long to be reunited with Amelia and provide her with love and care. As a part of their family, they want to be with her. They urged Lewis Bennett to do the right thing. Lewis Bennett, Isabella's husband, was sentenced to 8 years in prison on May 28, 2019, after pleading guilty to manslaughter in connection with her death. During his sentencing hearing, Bennett apologized sincerely to Isabella's family for putting them through immense pain. He acknowledged that his actions led to a devastating tragedy, for which he is truly remorseful. Lewis admitted to making poor decisions that worsened the situation. He expressed regret in federal court in Miami, where he waived his right to appeal as part of his plea bargain. Before the judge delivered the sentence, Lewis requested the opportunity to be released from prison early so that he could continue to care for their daughter, Amelia. Lewis expressed a desire to care for his daughter, saying, "I want to raise her in a way that honors my late wife's wishes." However, the judge ruled against him, sentencing him to 8 years in prison followed by 3 years of supervised release. As a result, Amelia will remain with her paternal grandparents in England for the time being. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Natasha Cournoyer. Natasha Cournoyer, 37 years old, has gone missing suddenly and without any notice. She didn't visit her mother, respond to phone calls, or return home. As the day went on, it became clear that none of her friends or colleagues had seen her either. Her worried relatives reported her missing at 5 p.m., prompting a police investigation. Natasha worked as a public relations specialist for the Correctional Service of Canada. Detectives began by interviewing her co-workers. Upon arrival, they found her car still parked nearby. A nervous-looking man, Michel Trottier, was standing by her vehicle. He claimed to be in a relationship with Natasha and was trying to figure out where she might have gone. The back door of Natasha's car had scratches, but it was unclear if they were related to her disappearance. With no reason to suspect Michel Trottier of involvement, detectives continued their investigation. Co-workers reported that Natasha was at work on October 1, 2009, the day before she vanished. She seemed to be in a good mood, friendly, and untroubled, with no signs of anything amiss. On October 2nd, Natasha needed a day off to deal with issues related to her recently deceased father's tombstone. To make up for time, she worked longer hours on October 1st and left the office around 8 p.m. According to her friends, Natasha was a kind and open person with no known conflicts or enemies. The police launched a large-scale search for Natasha, involving aviation and canine units. Initially, they focused on the area around the parking lot but found no clues to aid the investigation. Natasha's friends and relatives distributed flyers with her photo, hoping someone might have information about her disappearance. The first few hours after a person goes missing are crucial in finding witnesses or evidence. However, in Natasha's case, valuable time was lost because the police weren't notified until the evening of October 2nd, 21 hours after she left work. The search for Natasha took place from October 3rd to 5th, but unfortunately, no leads were found. Her family offered a $10,000 reward for any information that could help locate her. Natasha's boyfriend, Michel Trottier, suspected she had been kidnapped and made a televised plea for her safe release. Meanwhile, the police were investigating their personal lives. They had been together for 4 years, but their relationship had been rocky, with multiple breakups and reconciliations. The police explored all possible scenarios surrounding Natasha's disappearance. They reviewed CCTV footage from her workplace, both inside and outside the building. The footage showed Natasha arriving at 9:04 a.m. and leaving at 8:07 p.m. She had parked her car in a poorly lit area of the parking lot, and the cameras captured her walking towards it. However, she eventually disappeared from view due to the darkness. After a few minutes, the car headlights turned on and the car started moving, but instead of heading towards the exit, it drove to the opposite side of the parking lot, which was also poorly lit. The car stopped and the headlights went out. The vehicle remained in this position for about 20 minutes before moving towards the exit. It was determined that this car was not Natasha's, as she owned a Mazda. Further investigation revealed that the car in the video was a Ford Windstar minivan, which had entered the parking lot at 6:35 p.m. and parked next to Natasha's car. Based on the video footage, the police concluded that Natasha Cournoyer's disappearance was likely a kidnapping. On the 5th day of the search, October 6, 2009, the focus shifted from finding a missing person to investigating a homicide. Natasha's body was discovered in a vacant lot in the Point Aux Trumbull area, approximately 20 miles from her workplace. The body was located next to a dirt road that led to the riverbank. The news of Natasha's death devastated her relatives and friends, who were further disturbed by the medical examiner's report. According to the report, Natasha's cause of death was strangulation. Additionally, she had suffered 9 facial injuries, including a broken nose, and had marks on her wrists and ankles indicating that she had been bound. Seminal fluid was also found inside her body, which would serve as a source of DNA evidence. While awaiting DNA analysis results, detectives attempted to identify the owner of a minivan captured on camera the day Natasha vanished. In 2009, there were 2 motels near Natasha's workplace. On October 16, 2009, 10 days after her body was discovered, police visited both motels to review guest registration cards. At the Lido Motel, they found a guest who had registered a Ford Windstar. The guest was 48 years old Claude LaRouche, a registered sex offender with 2 prior convictions. In 1993, Claude was sentenced to 1 year in prison and 2 years of probation for coercing a 19-year-old acquaintance into sex. In 2005, he received a 40-month prison sentence for attempting to kidnap a 7-year-old girl. She managed to escape and run to a neighbor's house. Claude's 40-month sentence for the attempted kidnapping of a child raises questions about the severity of his punishment. In November 2008, Claude was released and started working as a carpenter. He married a woman with 2 sons, and they all lived together in a house about a 10-minute drive from where Natasha Cournoyer disappeared. Detectives found out Claude checked into a motel the night Natasha went missing. Forensic experts examined the motel room and discovered dark red stains on the carpet, which they sent for analysis. The same day, detectives visited Claude at his home. Since he had a prior prison record, the police already had his DNA on file. However, they needed time to compare it to the DNA found on Natasha's body. Claude claimed he didn't know Natasha but admitted to frequently visiting the Lido motel because it was cheap. He told the detectives he was unhappy with his intimate life with his wife and often rented a motel room to meet women offering paid sex services. When asked about his whereabouts on October 1st, the day Natasha disappeared, Claude said he couldn't remember anything, including staying at the Lido motel. He attributed his memory loss to excessive substance use, but his memory partially returned soon after. On November 5, 2009, a month after the body was discovered, detectives returned to Claude LaRouche's house. This time, however, it was not for a conversation. DNA analysis revealed that the seminal fluid found in Natasha Cournoyer's body matched LaRouche's. Additionally, Natasha's DNA was detected in the motel room Claude rented and inside his car. Montreal police say there's no link between the crime and Cournoyer's job at Correctional Service of Canada, and the victim didn't know the suspect. Following Claude's arrest, Montreal Police Inspector Daniel Rousseau stated that citizens could now feel safer in public. The news of the arrest shocked Claude's neighbors, who described him as a friendly and polite individual. The next day, on November 6, 2009, Claude LaRouche became a suspect in Natasha Cournoyer's case. Initially, he denied any wrongdoing, but faced with substantial evidence, he confessed to taking Natasha's life. However, he claimed her death was accidental and not intentional. During his 2011 trial, two differing accounts of the events emerged, one from Claude and his defense team, and the other from the prosecution. According to Claude's testimony, he was waiting in a parking lot for a drug dealer on the evening in question. While sitting in his car, Natasha appeared beside him. He then attacked her, forced her into his vehicle, and shut the door. Afterwards, Claude conversed with Natasha, and she allegedly agreed to accompany him to a motel. Claude LaRouche experienced memory lapses, which left him unable to recall why he stood in the parking lot for 20 minutes or what he did during that time. However, he conveniently remembered specific moments that worked in his favor. According to LaRouche, Natasha offered to satisfy his demands in exchange for her freedom while they were in the motel room. He agreed, but after she fulfilled his requests, they got into an argument. Claude lost control, attacked Natasha, and ultimately strangled her. He then cleaned the room, moved her body to his car, drove home, and went to bed. The next morning, after the substances he had taken wore off, he realized the gravity of his actions. Claude chose to get rid of Natasha's body. As he drove to the location where the body was later found, he cut her documents and bank cards into pieces and threw them out the car window. However, it's crucial to remember that this account comes from LaRouche himself, and the more he shared, the more inconsistencies and questions emerged about his claims. According to Claude's testimony, the day after disposing of Natasha's body, he returned to the scene and covered her with a blanket, fearing she would freeze. He revisited the body again the next day to retrieve the blanket, worried that it would hinder her discovery. LaRouche's statements suggest that his actions were influenced by a clouded consciousness, leading to illogical decisions. He claimed he did not intend to take Natasha's life, which he attempted to convey to those present during the trial. The prosecution's case relied on physical evidence and a witness testimony. The witness stated that while walking his dog near the parking lot on the day Natasha disappeared, he saw Claude attempt to attack a jogger around 7 p.m. However, Claude retreated when he noticed the witness and his dog. Natasha Cournoyer was attacked an hour later. The prosecutor was convinced that Claude had bound and abducted Natasha, taking her to a motel where she ultimately lost her life. In June 2011, Claude LaRouche was found guilty and received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 25 years. During the trial, it was revealed that just 2 weeks after Natasha's murder, Claude attempted to strangle another woman, Dominique Martel. However, she managed to fend him off by biting his finger. As a result, Claude was deemed a dangerous offender under Canadian law, rendering his prison sentence indefinite and significantly reducing his chances of early parole. Natasha had a peaceful and fulfilling life, with aspirations and objectives, all of which were brutally taken away by a man with a history of serious crimes. Despite his past, Claude was allowed to roam free, living among the community without adequate supervision. The fact that he had previously attempted to kidnap a 7-year-old girl raises questions about how he was able to reintegrate into society without proper monitoring. Natasha's loved ones continue to grapple with these unanswered questions, haunted by the thought that if the system had functioned correctly and Claude had been held accountable, Natasha might still be alive today. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Michelle Young. Jason Young was born in 1974 in Brevard, North Carolina. Jason grew up in a typical family. After completing high school, he attended the prestigious State University in Raleigh, the state capital. Following graduation, he secured a job as a salesman at a large retail chain. Jason proved to be a valuable and reliable employee, but his friends described him as inconsistent and unpredictable in his relationships with women. He had a reputation for being a womanizer, often changing partners. Michelle Young was born in February 1977 in New York. She was raised in a close-knit family with her younger sister Meredith and their devoted mother Linda. Linda played a significant role in Michelle's early life, nurturing her passions and talents from a young age. Michelle's interests in law and economics were evident from her school days, and she dreamed of pursuing a career in this field. Michelle's academic journey led her to apply to several universities after high school, eventually gaining acceptance into a top university in North Carolina. There, she pursued her master's degree in economics. After completing her education, Michelle secured a prestigious job at a leading accounting firm in the state, rapidly establishing herself as a skilled professional. She achieved financial stability, was able to support herself fully. A chance encounter at a bar on Michelle's birthday, when Jason accidentally spilled a cocktail on her, he immediately apologized and offered to buy her another. This kind and thoughtful act caught Michelle's attention, and they began chatting. As they talked, they discovered that they had a lot in common. They both went to the same college, although Jason graduated 3 years earlier. Their casual conversation quickly turned into a romantic relationship, and they began dating. Although they had deep feelings for each other, they had no plans to get married or move in together. At the time, Jason still lived with his parents in Brevard, while Michelle lived in Raleigh. They would see each other on weekends or during Jason's business trips to Raleigh. During one of their meetings, Michelle dropped a bombshell: she was pregnant. This news came as a shock to both of them, as they were not yet ready to become parents. Jason and Michelle were young and focused on their careers, with no immediate plans to start a family. However, when Michelle became pregnant, she decided to keep the baby after some initial hesitation. Jason took a month to come to terms with the situation and then relocated to be closer to Michelle. After a few months, they got married, but it wasn't due to love or the pregnancy. Instead, it was because Michelle lacked health insurance, and the cost of childbirth would have been prohibitively expensive. Marriage provided a solution to this financial burden. Their daughter, Cassidy Elizabeth, was born in the spring of 2004. Michelle threw herself into domestic life and family responsibilities, with the help of her mother and younger sister. Although Michelle's family was wary of Jason, they tried to avoid conflicts and accepted him as part of their family. Later that year, the young family moved into a large house in a quiet neighborhood. Michelle's mother, Linda, came to visit to help with housework and noticed a tense atmosphere in the home. Jason had a bad temper and often started arguments. Michelle tried to downplay these incidents and appear cheerful. However, she confirmed with her mother the true state of their relationship, which seemed ominous. When Cassidy was just 2 years old, Michelle found out she was pregnant again. She was nervous about sharing the news with her husband, but he took it calmly and even seemed happy. The family decided to visit Jason's parents in Brevard to share the news in person. They spent the weekend celebrating with relatives, and on Monday they left Cassidy with the grandparents for a few hours and went out to dinner to celebrate the event. As they were driving home, Jason, who was driving, overturned and the car went off the road into a ravine. They were left very frightened with a few scrapes and bruises, but their lives were not in danger. However, Michelle had suffered a miscarriage, so Michelle was very worried. Jason was surprisingly calm about the accident. Before the accident, during a business trip, Jason met an old college friend, Michelle Money. She had the same name as Jason's wife, Michelle. Jason told his wife about it. They decided to invite Michelle Money to visit their home, and she agreed. During her visit, Michelle Money began to complain about her unhappy family life. At the same time, Michelle Money kept complimenting Jason and telling his wife that she was lucky to be pregnant. Michelle was not worried about Michelle Money's behavior, but she genuinely wanted to comfort her friend. Jason and Michelle Money began calling each other every day and secretly meeting each other. Jason always justified his absence with business trips, and his wife could not guess anything. Things got complicated in the summer of 2006, when Michelle found out she was pregnant. Unlike her previous pregnancies, Jason's reaction was unhappy and cold. Michelle attributed his sadness to her previous miscarriage, still not knowing the real reason for his cold behavior. In November, with Michelle 5 months pregnant, Jason embarked on a 300-mile business trip. Michelle, who was pregnant, had a lengthy phone conversation with her best friend, discussing family problems and a heated argument she had with her husband the previous night. After the call, her husband left. Jason embarked on a 300-mile business trip. Around 10 p.m., Jason arrived at a hotel, claiming fatigue from his journey. However, instead of resting, he began to carefully examine the hotel's entrances, exits, and security cameras, planning a way to leave and return undetected. He was creating a solid alibi for a crime he intended to commit. Early the next morning, Jason calls Meredith and asks for her help. He tells her that he wants to surprise his wife with a piece of jewelry for their anniversary, but accidentally sent the order confirmation to their home fax machine. Jason is worried that Michelle will see the gift and ruin the surprise. Even though Meredith doesn't like Jason, she agrees to help him. Meredith arrived at her sister's house, using a secret door in the garage that only family members knew about and that was always left unlocked. The house was unusually quiet, but Michelle's keys, wallet, and important papers were still in the hallway, suggesting she hadn't left the premises. When Meredith went upstairs, she found the bedroom door wide open, but neither Michelle nor her daughter responded to her calls. When she entered the room, Meredith was met with a horrific scene. Michelle lay on the floor by the bed, her skull fractured and her body surrounded by a large pool of blood. The walls, furniture, and floor were all stained with blood, and tiny footprints were visible next to the body. Sadly, Michelle had been dead for hours. As Meredith rushed to call 911, she heard a faint noise coming from under the bed. When she looked back, she saw Michelle's young daughter, Cassidy, looking at her with a confused expression. Cassidy was unharmed. The little girl had witnessed her mother's brutal death and had spent many hours by her side. A forensic examination of Michelle's body later revealed a series of bruises, abrasions, and broken bones. Her teeth had been broken, and her skull had been fractured by a heavy object. A bloody pillow was found next to her body, with marks suggesting she had been suffocated by the pillow. The murder investigation revealed some crucial facts. First, nothing was stolen from the house, indicating that the killer's sole intention was to murder the Michelle. Furthermore, there were no signs of forced entry or broken locks, suggesting that the perpetrator had a key or knew about a secret door that only family members were aware of. Normally, Jason would be the prime suspect, but in this case, Jason seemed to have a solid alibi. He claimed to have checked into the hotel and not left until the morning, then attended a business meeting. Hotel records confirmed that he used a key card to enter and exit the room. However, upon closer inspection, investigators discovered several irregularities in Jason's alibi. A hotel employee found the fire escape open and propped up with a rock. When investigators reviewed surveillance footage to determine who had propped up the rock, they discovered that the camera had been deliberately disabled on the night of the murder. Jason's room was last recorded about half an hour after he checked in. The strange events continued. Later that night, a man resembling Jason stopped at a gas station between the hotel and the crime scene. When asked to show identification as required by the station's rules, he refused, paid with cash, and hastily left without waiting for his change. The on-call attendant identified Jason, but he denied any involvement, claiming that he had spent the night in the hotel room. His actions, however, raised suspicion. On the day before the tragedy, Jason had made more than 24 calls to his wife, Michelle, and 5 more to his mistress, Michelle Money, each lasting less than 15 seconds, suggesting he was in a state of panic. Notably, these calls were made outside the hotel, contradicting his claim that he had been in the room all night. Additionally, Jason was late for a scheduled business meeting with his partners and appeared distracted. While these incidents were suspicious, they did not prove his guilt, so Jason was able to maintain his normal life for nearly 3 years. He even won custody of his young daughter, which was a huge blow to Michelle's family. Jason's case was reopened in 2012 with new evidence. Witnesses reported seeing his distinctive white car near his home on the night of the murders. A child psychologist testified about Jason's daughter reenacting a disturbing scene with her doll. And Jason's former mistress Michelle Money revealed Jason's mood swings and violent outbursts, and that he had confided in her about his marital woes. This testimony helped convict Jason of brutally assaulting his pregnant wife, and he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. As a result of Jason's actions, his daughter, Cassidy, was left without parents. Her mother was murdered, and her father is in prison for the crime. Cassidy is now being cared for by her aunt and maternal grandparents.